On February 14, 2023, in Lincoln County, Oklahoma, a 15-year-old named Colin Griffith called 911. He reported that his father, Charles Robert Griffith, was dead. Officers arrived and found Charles with no signs of life. He had been shot in the head, chest, and had bled out before the doctors could help. According to Colin, another conflict had occurred between them, which was a frequent occurrence in their family, but this time, everything escalated. Charles had cornered his son with a knife, forcing Colin to defend his life. In the heat of the struggle, Colin shot his father and claimed it was an act of self-defense. Colin was immediately detained and taken to the police station for further investigation. He remained surprisingly calm and explained his version of the events in detail. Initially, his account seemed convincing, and he was released. However, as the investigation continued, more evidence emerged that contradicted Colin's statements. He was called in for questioning again to clarify the discrepancies in his story. During this second interview, the detectives expressed their disbelief, and Colin subsequently refused to cooperate, demanding a lawyer. He was then arrested, with a bail set at $50,000. His mother, Catherine, paid the bail immediately, allowing him to return home. Catherine revealed that she had divorced Charles long before and that there had been a prolonged custody battle. Colin had moved in with his father in 2019, 4 years before the tragic incident, which had become a significant problem. Charles had prevented any communication between mother and son, allowing only occasional phone calls. During one of these calls, Colin informed Catherine that his father had forbidden him from attending school, isolating him within their home and subjecting him to constant pressure. Colin stated that he had been trapped in his father's house for the last 4 years and was not even allowed to eat more than once a day. Detectives reviewed documents related to Catherine and Charles's lengthy divorce proceedings. Throughout their marriage, Charles had continually abused Catherine, who had reported him to the police multiple times, but the authorities had not taken action. After the divorce, Catherine lost her ability to see Colin. In August of the divorce year, Catherine sought sole custody since Charles impeded all contact between her and Colin. Colin reported that his father continually denigrated Catherine. As the investigation progressed, Charles claimed that he had severed communication between mother and son after Catherine threatened to commit her own life, painting her as dependent on alcohol and banned substance. He justified restricting contact as necessary for Colin's well-being. Charles even presented evidence that Catherine attempted to pose as someone else on Discord to chat with Colin and urged him to escape from his father's home. Despite substantial evidence of abuse by Charles, Colin was charged with first-degree murder. About a month later, prosecutors announced they could not gather enough convincing evidence for the teenager's guilt regarding the intentional murder of Charles. It appeared that Colin acted in self-defense while fleeing from his dangerous and unstable father. In March 2023, Colin was acquitted and returned to his mother's custody, placed under house arrest, and required to wear a tracking device. After their long-awaited reunion, Catherine began posting on social media to share these moments, including photographs related to Charles, culminating in an image of his grave. While she expressed relief in ending her relationship with Charles, she lamented that she hadn't done so sooner. As Colin gradually began to recover from his psychological trauma and reintegrate into society, about 7 months had passed since the tragic events. However, the sheriff's office received a call to check on the Griffith household. An officer arrived to find a visibly agitated Colin, who claimed that his mother had taken a gun, threatened to kill him, and then handed him the weapon, urging him to shoot her. This raised concerns about Catherine's mental health. When questioned, she insisted that Colin was lying, asserting that he was upset because she had confiscated his phone and headphones due to his poor school performance. Catherine expressed concern that Colin might be suffering from a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder. This stress was a result of the circumstances surrounding the murder of his father, leading to unstable behavior during this period. In Florida, the so-called Baker Act was in effect, which mandated that individuals suspected of serious mental disorders be involuntarily placed in medical institutions for appropriate assistance. Under this law, detention in a clinic is required for 72 hours to establish a diagnosis. During this period, Examinations are conducted to determine whether the patient requires longer and more serious treatment in isolation from society. Colin was placed in the appropriate facility under this law, where the staff heard him threaten violence, insisting that if he was sent home, he would either take his own life or kill his mother. Detectives spoke with Catherine, who stated that throughout the time her son lived with her, he had been visiting a psychotherapist. When the detectives spoke to the specialist, it became evident that Colin had threatened them if he received a serious diagnosis that would result in his being placed in a clinic. Consequently, instead of addressing the real issues he was experiencing, the psychotherapist noted only minor disorders, for which mild sedatives were prescribed. After this revelation, it was decided to keep Colin under psychiatric supervision for an additional 5 days, as the staff of the institution deemed him too dangerous to be released. A week later, Colin was returned to his mother. During the car ride, he stated again that he would kill himself or his mother if he were near her again, repeating that he had already killed his father and would do it again without hesitation. Catherine was frightened and began searching for a more suitable clinic that could accept Colin for long-term treatment. Unfortunately, similar clinics in Florida were overcrowded, which caused delays. Despite these challenges, Catherine managed to find an appropriate psychiatric clinic in Florida that could accommodate her son for the following months. However, the day when he was supposed to return to his mother was inexorably approaching. 2 months had passed, and in November, 15-year-old Colin returned home. 2 days later, emergency services received a 911 call from his maternal grandmother, Susan Detman. She reported that during a joint lunch, Colin had suddenly stood up, pulled his mother by the hair, and hit her in the groin. When she fell to the floor, he began to kick her. Upon the police's arrival, Colin again insisted that it was self-defense, as in the case with his father. However, his grandmother disagreed. She recounted witnessing her grandson's aggression, stating that he had initiated the attack on his mother. Colin was arrested for domestic violence but was soon released again. Once more, he threatened to take his own life or kill his mother right at the police station. It seemed that he did not want to go back to his mother because he did not feel safe with her. Colin described his life with her as a struggle between the desire to escape and the need to defend himself. Nevertheless, in February 2024, they began living together again, although a special prohibition order was issued to limit Colin's contact with Catherine in the house. This was similar to a restraining order but was designed to manage potentially dangerous individuals living in close quarters. Its effectiveness in such a confined space is hard to determine. On February 14, 2024, Colin went to his grandmother's house, but he was quickly located and was about to be returned to his mother. In May of that same year, they were reunited after he had spent another period of forced detention in a psychiatric hospital. During this time, Colin graduated from high school and was planning to continue his education in college. To aid his transition, his mother gifted him a brand new Volkswagen car worth $26,000. On her social media, numerous photos appeared showing her enjoying happy trips with her son to different places. Unfortunately, in reality, all of this was merely a facade, as the situation within the family was far from ideal. On September 8, 2024, 17-year-old Colin Griffith contacted the city police station once again, stating that he had a fight with his mother at his grandmother's house. Catherine had attacked him with a knife. They fought for a long time, and Catherine accidentally fell on the bladed weapon herself, resulting in a serious wound to her neck. On that fateful day, Colin was at his grandmother's house. When the sheriff's deputies arrived, they found him covered in blood, but he behaved very calmly and restrained. He recounted the story of self-defense and claimed that he was not guilty of his mother's death. Interestingly, several neighbors who lived nearby reported that they had become involuntary witnesses to Colin's inappropriate behavior. Colin had come to his grandmother's house a few days before these events, with his mother arriving later. Colin quarreled with his mother almost all day, and everyone in the area heard their arguments. About half an hour before the alleged murder, neighbors saw him dragging his mother by the hair and pulling her inside his grandmother's house. Catherine cried in pain and begged him to let her go, but she was unable to escape from her aggressive son. In the days leading up to these events, Colin had quarreled with his mother over chores around the house, which he had refused to do. Catherine complained to several friends and relatives on social media about Colin's behavior, expressing her concerns. In the days leading up to her death, Catherine had been actively communicating with friends. She frequently discussed Colin's behavior, describing him as uncontrollable and dangerous. She did not want to bring him back home from her mother's house. Catherine expressed feeling exhausted and tired of his antics, fearing for her safety and life. During that time, the grandmother was away and could not witness the events firsthand. However, it is possible that her absence saved her life. Colin lived peacefully in grandmother's house alone for 2 days until his mother arrived. Shortly before the grandmother's return, the house was filled with forensic experts who began an active investigation into all the circumstances surrounding the incident. They managed to find the alleged murder weapon, which turned out to be a bloody kitchen knife. The grandmother was initially convinced that her grandson was guilty of what had happened. However, she later radically changed her mind. The prosecutor's office believed that Colin was lying. They wished to try him as an adult and impose a lengthy prison sentence in order to protect the public from a potentially dangerous individual. The forensic expert identified a deep, penetrating wound in Catherine's neck. However, this did not correspond with an accidental injury. According to the expert's conclusion, the blow was delivered with such force that it was impossible for her to have accidentally fallen onto the knife. The nature of her death led to the consideration of premeditated murder. After this discovery, Oklahoma detectives also questioned whether Colin's actions had been classified correctly in relation to his father. One of Catherine's ex-boyfriends, a man named Robert, posted a video within 24 hours of her murder. In it, he discussed his experiences with her and Colin. He noted that Colin was well trained in self-defense despite his young age. Colin was proficient in using cold weapons and had hand-to-hand combat skills, which he claimed were taught to him by his father while he was alive. Robert also learned about Colin's many mental disorders and believed this was a legacy from his father. He described Catherine as a very complex individual but believed she would not have been capable of an armed attack on her son or of voluntarily taking her own life. The police officers in this city were well acquainted with Colin, considering his described behavior to be indicative of clinical psychopathy. Catherine was described as a loving but somewhat frivolous mother who paid with her life for her sincere feelings for her son. After these tragic events, a press conference was held, and it became apparent to the detectives that Colin showed absolutely no remorse for what had happened. He did not express regret over the loss of his closest family members. The most disturbing aspect was the cold-blooded indifference he demonstrated while communicating with the police. Police investigators spoke with the grandmother, who confirmed that her daughter had been complaining for about a year, since Charles's murder, about how Colin had been inflicting real emotional terror on her. Both women were simply afraid to be around him and did not feel safe. The grandmother feared that she could easily become the next victim if nothing was done. Forensic experts examined the crime scene and identified major contradictions in Colin's account. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house, even though he insisted that he had been arguing with his mother for at least half an hour. It appeared as though he had simply taken a knife and stabbed her in the neck without any signs of a struggle. The aggression displayed by Colin towards his mother was corroborated by neighbors who witnessed him dragging her by the hair. No one saw Catherine attack or even threaten her son. Experts analyzing Colin's case concluded that he suffered from psychopathy. According to their observations, such individuals are capable of wearing a mask of sanity and may outwardly seem quite normal. However, deep down, they hide serious emotional deficits and mental development disorders. Such people can be mean and callous. They willingly and actively showing aggression while boldly socially dominating. They are unable to recognize fear or aggression in others and do not demonstrate these qualities themselves in any way. This is one of the dangerous traits of a psychopath, as he will easily pass a polygraph test. This has been a recurring issue in the history of crime incidents related to some of the most brutal crimes in the world. Polygraph equipment reacts to the manifestation of emotions, in particular fear, which are blocked in a psychopath. In addition, they can be impulsive and inhibited. Those involved in this case, as well as in the analysis of Colin's condition, cited examples of the most notorious psychopaths who have committed terrible crimes in their lives. It was believed that Colin Griffith could repeat their path if he was not stopped in time. Against this backdrop, the chief prosecutor in Oklahoma stated that it is necessary to take a closer look at the death of Charles Griffith, as evidence of Catherine's murder suggested that both the father and mother were victims of premeditated murder. The murder of the father could have been reopened and reviewed, but there were complications. The prime suspect, Colin, had approached his defense thoroughly. It all began when Colin called 911. He used vague wording and did not even say that his mother was dead, as if he did not know this. In fact, Catherine was so injured that she bled to death within minutes. When detectives arrived at Colin's grandmother's house, they found him bloodied, yet he remained calm and composed, so much so that his demeanor astonished them. Colin Griffith was charged with the assault and first-degree murder of his mother. The prosecutor described in detail the problematic relationship between Colin and his mother, also focusing on the domestic violence that Catherine had accused her son of several months before her death. The prosecution showed recordings and digital evidence of Colin's threats to harm his mother. To refute, the defense attorney insisted that Catherine was eccentric and unpredictable, with periodic outbursts of aggression, which contributed to the events of that fateful day. Prosecution witnesses described Colin's behavior as dispassionate and cold, even including the detective who spoke with him during the first half hour after the murder. His behavior did not indicate at all that he had just lost a loved one. It is noteworthy that no signs of a struggle were found on Colin's body, despite his insistence that his mother had attacked him first. There were bruises on Catherine's stomach. Colin likely hit his mother with his knee and kicked her with his shoe. At the same time, there was a significant amount of her blood on him when the police arrived. Colin attributed these traces to an attempt to provide first aid to his mother before the paramedics arrived. The emergency services dispatcher did consult him on this issue, but it was highly questionable whether he actually assisted her. Law enforcement officers, already familiar with Colin, spoke at the trial, particularly regarding a previous case where Colin was charged with domestic violence. At that time, obvious traces of a struggle were found on Catherine's body, while Colin insisted that she had hit him first in the face, though he showed no signs of any injuries. Naturally, the young man was not believed. These same witnesses confirmed that he had threatened to harm both his mother and grandmother during his compulsory treatment. During cross-examination, Colin insisted that he did not feel safe at home and even expressed a desire to stay in the correctional facility. Several law enforcement officers who worked with him after the domestic violence incident stated that they were forced to return him to his family solely because of regulations. Many acknowledged that this could lead to serious consequences for everyone involved. Those who knew the family well described Colin as a manipulator and a cruel person. He could appear friendly and respectful to those who provided him with valuable gifts, such as his mother and grandmother. Catherine took him on trips, bought him video games, a mobile phone, and other gadgets, and even purchased him a car. However, as soon as he heard the word no or received a request for help around the house, he would change. He'd become genuinely angry and dangerous. Experts who worked with Colin in a psychiatric clinic discovered that he had two distinct personalities, which he referred to as Colin the First and Colin the Second. The first personality merely wanted to survive. He was a downtrodden and frightened schoolboy, while the second was cruel and ready to protect the first at all costs, even to the point of killing for him. When the forensic expert who conducted the examination of the deceased spoke on behalf of the prosecution, he described in detail the wounds sustained by Catherine. The knife blade had passed through the esophagus, the trachea, and the vocal cords. Its tip protruded on the other side. The forensic expert insisted that, of all the numerous cases involving deaths from knife wounds with which he had personally worked, there was not a single instance of such a voluntary departure from life, especially with such a deep wound. The expert was certain that to inflict such a deep wound required enormous effort. Simply falling on a knife would not cause such injuries, and this all pointed to murder. Other family members expressed great anxiety regarding the relationship between Colin and Catherine. For example, the maternal grandfather had heard several times how his grandson wished for the death of both his mother and grandmother. Catherine reported that Colin had threatened them both at least 3 times. Despite these threats, Catherine continued to insist that she loved her son and wanted him to live with her at home. Interestingly, the grandfather heard Colin express a desire to cut his mother's throat so that she would bleed to death, which was very similar to the injury inflicted on Catherine, considering the force with which the knife was thrust into her throat. Colin seemed to be experiencing an attack of cruelty and hatred directed against a loved one. When the defendant's lawyer took on the case, the most valuable witness for the defense unexpectedly turned out to be Colin's grandmother, Susan. She recounted numerous instances of Catherine's dubious behavior. For example, there was an occasion when she simply forgot that her son had been visiting his grandmother. Additionally, there were several instances in which Catherine had threatened to take her own life. Susan also mentioned that Catherine got pregnant for the first time when she was only 13 years old and gave birth to Colin when she was 22. According to Susan, Catherine was quite hot-tempered and eventually stopped all contact with her family. Susan claimed that Catherine had confessed to her that Catherine used violence against Colin, hitting him with a knee, a belt, even guns, and forcing him to do push-ups. Catherine feels burdened having to wake up early in the morning to take her mentally challenged son to school. Susan insisted that Catherine should call Colin 3 times a day for the first week of his detention, but Catherine was encouraged when Colin was found guilty and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The change in the grandmother's testimony shocked many because earlier she had insisted that she was afraid of her grandson and that he threatened them. Now, it seemed she was shifting the blame for what happened to Catherine. In fact, she appeared so ready to malign her murdered daughter that it caused significant damage to the prosecution's case. In closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized that the defendant harbored hatred for his mother. This animosity ultimately led to the charge of premeditated murder against Colin. After hearing arguments from both sides, the jury deliberated on the verdict. The defense's arguments proved effective, and when the jury returned, they delivered a verdict of not guilty, concluding that Catherine was not being held against her will and that her death was largely viewed as a voluntary departure from life. They determined that she had provoked her own son into an altercation during which she died, whether accidentally or intentionally. In the wake of these events, disputes have continued, and serious doubts have emerged regarding whether the murder of Colin's father was truly an act of self-defense. Currently, an investigation into his father's death in Oklahoma is ongoing. Some relatives believe that if Colin had not escaped justice for his father's murder and if the Oklahoma prosecutor's office had acted more decisively, he would be behind bars, and his mother would still be alive. As it stands, no one can feel safe, especially Susan, who actively supported him during the trial and to whom he has sent threats. The case of Colin Griffith is a heartbreaking tragedy, where family conflicts and deep psychological trauma led to irreversible consequences. The deaths of both Charles and Catherine not only claimed 2 lives but also left unanswered questions about the nature of Colin, a teenager caught between the lines of victim and perpetrator. Although the court's decision freed him, the haunting effects of Colin's violent actions and suspicions about his motives continue to affect his family and community. While Susan and the rest of her family cope with fear and loss, this story serves as a reminder of the importance of timely intervention during mental health crises and domestic violence. Colin's life may go on, but the cost of these tragedies will forever be an indelible reminder that neglect and inaction can lead to irreversible, tragic outcomes. Elias Otero was born on November 19, 1996, in Albuquerque, New Mexico's largest city. He was the first child of Louise and Alicia Otero, a hardworking couple whose biggest dream was to create a loving family. Eventually, their wish came true when they welcomed 4 more children. Elias grew up in a warm environment, surrounded by his siblings, including his younger sister Nika, who is 4 years his junior. From a young age, Elias demonstrated courage and responsibility. He always intended to protect those around him and made an effort to do the right thing. In high school, Elias's outgoing personality helped him make many friends and made his parents proud. Despite his love of playing video games and having a vibrant social life, he is also a good student and has a good sense of humor, which makes him very popular with his friends. When it was time to choose a career, he decided to pursue law enforcement, driven by his protective instincts. His family was not surprised by this choice, as he was known for his calm demeanor and commitment to justice. His ability to maintain order and respect in various situations set him apart, and his mother, Alicia, often relied on him for support, knowing he could handle challenges maturely. Elias's respectful and gentle nature distinguished him, embodying values that were increasingly rare among his peers. By late 2020, he graduated as a corrections officer and began working at the Albuquerque Penitentiary. At just 24 years old, he had a bright future marked by professional achievements and a recent engagement. As he prepared for his wedding and started his new life with his fiancée, Elias remained close to his parents and siblings, maintaining close family ties. On the evening of February 10, 2021, everything changed for the family. The day started normally, but the incident took a terrifying turn. That night, Nicholas Otero, Elias' younger brother, contacted an 18-year-old girl named Annabella Dukes via the Snapchat app. Captivated by her beauty and personality, Nicholas quickly felt a strong attraction to her. During their brief chat, Anna suggested they meet in person that very night. Excited by the idea, Nicholas agreed and went to pick her up at the address she provided. Driving his red Lexus, Nicholas felt confident and energized. Leaving the house late at night was common for him, so his family was not worried when he left. When he arrived to meet Anna, her beauty was even more striking than he had imagined. She suggested they go to a park in the city center for a more private setting. However, during the drive, Nicholas began to sense something was off. Anna made curious comments about his diamond-studded necklace and asked how much it cost. She also inquired if he had a weapon or cash in the car, making him uncomfortable. Despite his unease, he decided to continue the evening, hoping things would improve at the park. Once they arrived at the park, Nicholas noticed that Anna's phone showed an active call, indicating that someone might be listening to them. Before he could react, another car pulled up behind them, and 3 armed men got out. The situation escalated quickly as the men forced Nicholas out of his car. In the chaos, one of them even suggested using his weapon against him. Fortunately for Nicholas, the attackers only searched his vehicle. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that Anna had betrayed him. Moments later, he saw her talking to the men as if they were close friends. His feeling of humiliation increased as he realized that Anna was romantically involved with one of them. The young man, Adrian Avila, was only 17 but appeared to be the leader of the group. After they took Nicholas's diamond necklace, credit cards, and some cash, he thought it was over, but it was just the beginning. The group was not satisfied and wanted more. They forced Nicholas back into his car, with one of the attackers taking the driver's seat while the others split between Nicholas's car and their own, holding him at gunpoint. They instructed Nicholas to call his older brother, Elias, asking for $11,000 and a gun in exchange for his release, threatening to kill him if he didn't comply. Driving at high speed toward Nicholas's family home, the group believed they were in control. However, Elias, who had been awakened by Nicholas's urgent call, quickly took command of the situation. After alerting his siblings about the danger, he reassured them that he would protect them from the criminals. When the attackers arrived, Elias confronted them without hesitation while armed. He stepped outside to face them, but the situation escalated quickly. Adrian reacted faster than Elias, shooting him fatally. The scene became even more traumatic as Elias's family watched in horror while the tragedy unfolded. The attackers fled, 2 on foot and 2 in a car, while Nicholas seized the opportunity to escape and sought safety around 2:20 a.m. One of Elias's younger sisters called emergency services to report her brother's severe injuries. Meanwhile, their father, Louise, was abruptly awakened by his phone. The call from his daughter brought devastating news. Overwhelmed with sorrow, he struggled to explain the situation to Alicia, Elias's mother, who rushed to their son's side. They arrived at the scene in under 5 minutes, only to find Elias lying on the pavement. It was unclear if he was still alive, but the sight of his immobile body shattered their hearts. Paramedics arrived shortly after the incident, but it was too late. Elias Otero, only 24 years old, was pronounced dead that tragic morning. His mother, Alicia, couldn't stop questioning why this had to happen to her eldest son, who had always steered clear of trouble, bad influences, and banned substances. While the family struggled to cope with their loss, police discovered 3 handguns and a rifle near Elias's body. They explained to officers that Nicholas had shown up with 3 armed men who were threatening him. Later that night, a shaken and tearful Nicholas returned, burdened by the grief of losing his brother, whom he had admired, and overwhelmed by guilt for unintentionally putting his brother in danger. Authorities have opened an investigation to hold the criminals accountable. Detectives canvassing the area found Nicholas's abandoned and damaged car a few blocks from the crime scene. An autopsy revealed that Elias had been struck by 5 fatal bullets. As part of the investigation, Nicholas detailed the traumatic incident to the authorities. Despite the emotional strain, he was motivated by a strong desire for justice for his brother. He shared everything he remembered, including a brief online conversation with Anna, who was connected to the incident. After the crime, Anna texted Nicholas, claiming she was fleeing from the 3 dangerous men and insisted she didn't know them and had nowhere to go. However, neither Nicholas nor the detectives found her claims credible. A few days after Elias's funeral, his fiancée bravely spoke to the media about the man she had hoped to spend her life with. In interviews, she described him as having a big heart and being deeply devoted to family and friends. She and his family tried to understand why such a tragedy happened to such a good man. Their only hope was for justice to be served. The tragic case profoundly impacted the Albuquerque community, leaving residents feeling shocked, angry, sad, and frustrated. Additionally, Elias's death heightened public distrust of the legal system. Elias's family, in particular, became increasingly disheartened as investigators kept details about the case private to protect the investigation. This lack of communication created uncertainty about whether the perpetrators would ever be brought to justice. Meanwhile, police were quietly investigating to identify the suspects, focusing on Anna's social media activities. They discovered she had been in contact with another man the night before Elias's murder. Anna and her accomplice had previously used social media to lure Nicholas. They had robbed him of his car but left him unharmed. They planned to use that stolen vehicle for a larger target. Based on this information, police have stepped up efforts to find the 3 other people involved. The first suspect arrested was Adrian, who was found to have played a key role in the crime. His history was troubling, as he had previously been involved in a 2020 homicide where a 16-year-old boy was shot and killed. Despite the seriousness of that case, a judge allowed Adrian to be released on bail, requiring only that he wear a GPS monitor. In December 2021, just before Christmas, a warrant was issued for Adrian's arrest. He turned himself in on December 27th and was charged with open murder, kidnapping, 2 counts of armed robbery with a deadly weapon, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. After his initial court appearance, Alicia expressed relief about the case's progress in a local news interview. She remembered how she and her husband cried upon hearing about Adrian's arrest. She promised to advocate for her son during his funeral, which became her source of strength. Meanwhile, Anna was still on the run. The Albuquerque Police Department shared her photo with the community, asking for assistance in locating her. Anna's legal situation became increasingly dire, and her involvement in the crime made her a fugitive. Alicia publicly appealed for help, urging anyone who saw Anna to reach out to Crime Stoppers, a program that allows anonymous tips regarding criminal activity. She labeled Anna as dangerous and a threat to society. In response, Crime Stoppers offered a $2,500 reward for information leading to Anna's arrest. However, the police did not release the names of 2 other suspects nor issue warrants for their capture. It wasn't until late January 2022, about a month after Adrian's arrest, that authorities captured Anna. She faced multiple charges, including open murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Anna was held in a detention facility without bail. A local news outlet reported that law enforcement continued to search for a 3rd suspect after Anna's capture. Alicia appeared on television again, reaffirming her hope for justice in her son's case. Despite the progress, she felt there was still an important fight ahead, advocating for stricter laws in New Mexico. She insisted that a life sentence for each perpetrator was the minimum needed and expressed concern that bail could allow them to be released before trial. Alicia sought comfort and a sense of purpose by reaching out to other mothers who had also experienced the loss of children to violence. They met regularly to support one another and brainstorm ways to address community violence. During these discussions, Alicia reflected on the tragedy and sought answers to her lingering questions. She realized that unknowingly, Nicholas had made himself a target by frequently posting photos and videos of his cars and possessions on social media, drawing the attention of individuals like Anna and others with harmful intentions. In August 2022, Anna accepted a plea deal during a virtual hearing. She pleaded guilty to charges of aggravated armed robbery with a firearm, conspiracy, and others. In return, the charges of murder and kidnapping against her were dropped, and she was sentenced to serve between 5 and 15 years in prison. In contrast, Adrian pleaded not guilty to all charges during his virtual hearing. Alicia and Louise shared their devastation with the media, expressing how the strong evidence against Adrian made the judge's decision perplexing. They feared for their safety and that of their remaining children while Adrian was still free in the community. The prosecutors appealed the judge's ruling, and Elias's family felt relieved when the state Supreme Court overturned the decision. In the spring of 2024, Adrian accepted a plea deal for both the 2020 case and Elias's 2021 case. During a courtroom hearing, he admitted guilt for both crimes. Prosecutors disclosed that Anna and other accomplices from both incidents were ready to testify against him. They revealed that Anna had planned the robbery involving Nicholas and Elias, but it was emphasized that she had acted under Adrian's influence and control. Adrian was identified as the leader of the group. Before his sentencing, Adrian expressed remorse to Elias's family, but the judge sentenced him to 29 years in prison. Despite the rulings, the parents of Elias, Alicia, and Louise continued to grieve the loss of their son. Elias's death is not only a tragedy for the family but also a wake-up call for the entire community. As a promising young man, living for justice and love, Elias had his life taken away by senseless violence and negative temptations from social networks. Although justice has been served, the pain his family endures will never fade away. Their struggle, particularly that of his mother Alicia, has become a symbol of the power of motherhood and the desire to change the legal system to protect the innocent. Lindsay Clancy was graduated with a biology degree from Quinnipiac College in 2012. 2 years later, she became a licensed nurse after studying at the Massachusetts General Hospital Institute of Health Professions. Lindsay dedicated her career to helping others as a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, where she quickly became known for her exceptional care and was well liked by her colleagues. Her attention to detail and empathy made her a favorite among patients, many of whom specifically requested her for future deliveries. She had a unique talent for calming anxious parents, guiding them through the labor process. In 2016, Lindsay married Patrick Clancy, a software engineer. A year later, they welcomed their daughter, Cora, who dreamed of becoming both a doctor. In 2019, they had their second child, Dawson, a cheerful, charming boy whose laughter and bright smile could light up any room. In 2022, Lindsay gave birth to Callan, a happy, easygoing child. Lindsay, Patrick, and their children lived in a lovely house in Duxbury, Massachusetts, which they bought for $500,000. The home had all the amenities they desired, with a charming backyard featuring a white picket fence and a playground. To their friends and family, Lindsay and Patrick appeared to have a perfect marriage. They rarely argued, their deep affection for each other was clear, as they frequently said love words throughout the day. They seemed to be the perfect example of a happy couple. Patrick was a devoted father to his 3 kids. Their connection was strong, with Patrick often playing with them in the backyard. For Lindsay, there was nothing more important than being a mother. She found raising her children to be the most rewarding aspect of her life. The walls of their home were decorated with photos of her children, and she frequently shared their pictures on social media. Lindsay often posted heartfelt messages, expressing that she felt like the luckiest mama in the world and was so unbelievably thankful for her family life. Those who knew her recognized her commitment to motherhood, noting that she would leave gatherings early to return to her children. She deeply disliked hearing them cry, even during sleep training. After the births of Cora and Dawson, Lindsay found herself overwhelmed by her emotions. The challenges of motherhood felt heavy, and she struggled to manage the complexities it brought. However, she shared on Facebook that her experience with motherhood this time around, with Callan, felt easier. She focused on exercise, nutrition, and rest to improve her emotional well-being. As time passed, Lindsay began to feel anxious about returning to work after her maternity leave. Balancing full-time motherhood with her career started to feel too much for her. In search of support, she turned to various therapies and tried different medications. By September 2022, her anxiety reached its peak, prompting her to seek additional help with an evaluation at the Women and Infant Center for Women's Behavioral Health in Providence. She was not diagnosed with postpartum depression during this visit. On January 1, 2023, Lindsay told her husband that she was having thoughts of hurting herself and their children. Worried for her safety, Lindsay chose to seek help and admitted herself to a hospital for mental health treatment. She spent the next 5 days in McLean Hospital receiving essential care. Upon her discharge, doctors concluded that she was not a danger to herself or others. However, the depth of her struggles remained hidden. Throughout January, Lindsay seemed to improve. Her family enjoyed outings to museums and restaurants. She claimed she no longer had thoughts of self-harm. Even her mother noted a positive shift in her text messages, which sounded more cheerful. Yet, beneath this positive facade, Lindsay was still fighting her internal battles. On January 24, 2023, everything changed for the Clancy family. That day, Lindsay's hidden thoughts and feelings were revealed in a heartbreaking way. It started as a typical day. Lindsay took her children to the doctor for a checkup, as her daughter Cora had a routine appointment with the pediatrician. After returning home, Lindsay spent a lovely afternoon playing in the snow with her kids. She took some photos to capture these moments and shared them with her husband and her mother. Patrick was working from home in the basement. Around 4 p.m., after Lindsay and the children came inside from playing in the snow, Lindsay searched for ways to kill people on her phone and sent Patrick to get takeaway food from a restaurant further away than usual. Lindsay said she suffered a psychotic moment after hallucinating and hearing a voice telling her to kill herself and kill the children. At 5:10 p.m., Lindsay called the restaurant to place their order and mentioned that Patrick would pick it up. Patrick left the house at 5:15 p.m. At 5:34 p.m., Lindsay returned Patrick's call, and their conversation lasted 14 minutes. While everything seemed fine during the call, Patrick felt that Lindsay was busy with something else while they spoke. It was a chilly evening when Patrick arrived home at 6 p.m. after picking up dinner. As he parked in his driveway and entered the house, he was struck by an unsettling silence. The normally lively home felt eerily quiet without the familiar sounds of his wife, Lindsay, and their 3 children. Increasingly anxious, Patrick searched the house for any sign of them. When he found no one, his heart raced with worry. He called Lindsay's cell phone at 6:09 p.m., hoping to hear her voice, but there was no answer. Concerned and anxious, Patrick climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. The silence was overwhelming, with each of his steps echoing in the empty house. When he reached the door, he saw it was locked, which troubled him since Lindsay had never locked herself in before. He turned the doorknob, but it wouldn't open. He tried pulling harder, but the lock was unyielding. Anxious to find his wife, Patrick began to bang on the door, hoping for a reply, but all he heard was silence. Frustrated, he kept struggling with the locked door. He finally managed to force it open, only to be confronted with a horrific scene that would haunt him forever. Blood was splattered on the floor and windowsill. A knife lay on Lindsay's bedside table. The horrifying sight sent chills down Patrick's spine as he realized that something terrible had occurred in that room. Patrick rushed to the bloody windowsill and looked outside, where he saw his wife, Lindsay, lying in the backyard. His heart raced with fear as he quickly called 911 and ran down the stairs to her. When Patrick reached Lindsay, he found her lying on her back, covered in blood, with visible slashes on her neck and wrists. Though she was conscious, she barely responded. Overwhelmed with panic, Patrick struggled to understand what had happened. As Patrick's mind whirled with confusion and worries about their 3 young children, he was forced to ask the unthinkable, where were the kids? Lindsay responded, in the basement. Patrick stayed outside with Lindsay until the police and paramedics arrived, he continually speaking with the dispatcher. The dispatcher could hear the worry in Patrick's voice as he described the serious situation and kept close to his wife. When the paramedics arrived, they quickly assessed Lindsay's condition. They worked hard to stabilize her and provide necessary medical care. Meanwhile, Patrick was deeply concerned about their children. While the paramedics focused on Lindsay, he decided to look for his kids but remained on the phone with the dispatcher. Entering their home, he went down the stairs into the basement, where Lindsay had mentioned the children were. As he descended, he called out, hoping for a response, but there was only silence as he reached the bottom. The atmosphere was tense and the silence was oppressive, creating a growing sense of fear. Suddenly, the dispatcher heard a scream on the line, as if he was in danger. He found his 3 children unconscious on the floor. Overcome with panic, Patrick immediately called for help, pleading with his children to wake up and breathe. He shouted so that the police officers outside could hear. Within minutes, the officers came down and were met with a horrifying scene. 3 innocent children lay unresponsive on the cold floor. Authorities confirmed that they seemed to be strangled. Amidst the chaos, Patrick exclaimed, "She killed the kids," referring to Lindsay. Cora, just 5 years old, and Dawson, only 3, were pronounced dead at the scene. Baby Callan, merely 8 months old, was alive but gravely injured. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, Callan passed away several days later in the hospital, with Patrick holding him in his arms as he took his last breaths. Patrick wrote that his youngest son, Callan, died with great courage despite his young age. Perhaps it was his son's way of demonstrating what he needed to do to move forward. He will always try to be inspired by him. Callan will always be his little hero. In under 20 minutes, a series of tragic events turned Patrick's life upside down, leaving him heartbroken. Meanwhile, Lindsay was taken to the hospital to treat her injuries after jumping out of a window and falling 20 feet in an attempt to end her life. She was hospitalized under police guard, faces 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation or suffocation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, officials said. Days after the tragedy, Patrick Clancy shared his thoughts. Despite enduring unimaginable sorrow, he spoke with love and forgiveness toward his wife. Patrick said he was not married to a demon, he married a sick person. He also recalled her self-treatment efforts. However, he acknowledged that the ongoing pain from the situation weighed heavily on his family. The GoFundMe campaign aimed at covering the funeral costs for their children received significant public support. Still, some contributors voiced concerns that their donations were indirectly supporting Lindsay's legal defense. This sparked debate and raised alarms about how the funds might be used. Lindsay's lawyers later clarified that her legal fees were not covered by the GoFundMe proceeds. Her parents were responsible for those costs. Despite the controversy surrounding the GoFundMe campaign, it successfully raised over $1 million. At this point, the campaign is no longer accepting donations since it has achieved its goal. On February 7, 2023, a brief hearing took place in Plymouth District Court, where a judge approved Lindsay's attorney's request for the police to set aside security protocols at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, where Lindsay was receiving treatment. This request was necessary for a forensic psychiatrist to evaluate Lindsay for symptoms of postpartum depression. Lindsay's lawyers argued that her self-inflicted injuries severely restricted her movement, which meant that she posed no danger to anyone. They also claimed that she was given an excessive amount of prescription medications. The medications mentioned by her attorney included clonazepam, Valium, Ativan, Zoloft, amitriptyline, meropenem, Prozac, mood stabilizers like lamotrigine and cariprazine, as well as buprenorphine, hydroxyzine, and Ambien. In just 4 months, she had been prescribed a total of 13 different medications to treat mood disorders, anxiety, and psychosis. According to her attorneys, One of the consequences of this overmedication was the development of thoughts about suicide, violence. The attorney believed it was essential to have a detailed evaluation by a forensic psychiatrist to assess the severity of her symptoms and the possible risks linked to her medication. The prosecutor from Plymouth County described her actions as extremely atrocious, cruel, countering the defense's claim that her postpartum mental state and the medication she was taking influenced her decision to commit murder. During the court hearings, Lindsay listened quietly from a hospital room, observing everything through a monitor as the case details were presented. A not guilty plea was submitted for Lindsay. When she took the tragic step of murdering her 3 children, it was classified as filicide, the intentional act of killing one's own children. A psychiatrist who specializes in filicide identifies 5 main reasons why a parent might commit such an act. One surprising reason some parents commit filicide is a misguided sense of altruism. They may believe that by ending their child's life, they are protecting them from suffering or preventing a devastating future. This reason is challenging to understand because it contradicts the natural parental instinct to protect and nurture. Another factor that can lead to filicide is acute psychosis. Parents with mental health disorders, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, might experience delusions or hallucinations that distort their perception of reality. They may mistakenly view their children as threats, believing they are acting to save them from harm. Additionally, some parents may feel regret or disappointment about having children. This negative sentiment can grow into frustration or even hatred, driving the parent to consider drastic actions to eliminate the child. Physical abuse can also contribute to filicide. In situations where children are subjected to severe or ongoing abuse, a toxic environment can form, with the parent becoming the perpetrator. In extreme cases, the parent may experience a sense of relief after harming their child, culminating in the devastating act of filicide. Filicide can occur as a form of revenge between spouses. When one parent feels betrayed, abandoned, or abused by the other, they might misplace their anger onto their child. In such cases, harming or even killing their child may be seen as a way to seek revenge or regain control over their partner, reflecting deep despair and frustration. A devastating incident brought attention to the relationship between postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and violent behavior. Lindsay's lawyers claimed that her actions after giving birth were caused by a combination of postpartum psychosis and excessive medication. During the postpartum period, a woman's hormone levels drop rapidly, triggering chemical changes in the brain that can lead to mood swings. While this natural phase can bring about feelings of being overwhelmed, low energy, intrusive thoughts about self-harm or harming the baby, and sleep problems, postpartum psychosis is a much more serious condition that distorts a mother's sense of reality. It affects roughly 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 deliveries and is marked by a sudden and severe loss of mental stability. Symptoms can include delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, extreme mood swings, and confused thinking. During the investigation into the murder of Lindsay Clancy's 3 children, a diary entry from her phone, dated October 25, 2022, was found. This entry, written months before the tragic events, provided troubling insights into her mental state leading up to the incident. In her diary, Lindsay expressed frustration and resentment towards her children, particularly Cora and Dawson. She mentioned feeling resentment because they prevented her from caring for their infant brother, Callan, as she had with her first child. Lindsay noted her discontent when Cora and Dawson returned from preschool, mentioning that their negative moods affected her as well. She described feeling depressed and suggested that her emotional struggles were impacting her children. Moreover, detectives found that just 4 days before the murders, Lindsay searched her phone for "Can you treat a sociopath?" and looked up methods for killing. The revelation that Lindsay harbored resentment towards her children and sought information on how to carry out such a heinous crime was deeply disturbing. During an arraignment in October 2023, the toxicology reports indicated the presence of several medications in Lindsay's system. These reports showed she had been prescribed antidepressants, antipsychotics, sedatives, and an anticonvulsant, all at therapeutic levels. The prosecution aimed to prove that Lindsay had planned the murders in advance and intentionally committed the act of violence. They argued that the medications in her system did not influence her actions, asserting that she had already decided to kill her children. Additionally, the timing and levels of the medication supported their claim that Lindsay acted with clarity and was not impaired by the drugs. In 2024, Patrick Clancy completed the Boston Marathon in honor of his children, raising money for Boston Children's Hospital. Meanwhile, Lindsay, who was on trial for the murder of her children, continued her treatment at Tewkesbury Hospital. She is currently reported to be permanently paralyzed. Clancy's trial was originally scheduled for December 1, 2025, but was rescheduled to January 5, 2026, at the request of both parties. Her case has sparked discussions about postpartum mental health and how little is known about it. In May 2023, police in Spain received a troubling call from a peaceful neighborhood in Torremolinos. Inside one of the apartments, they found the body of a young woman who had been stabbed multiple times. The suspect managed to escape but was caught a few hours later at a nearby cafe. However, this tragedy was just the starting point for a string of discoveries that connected to a case that had remained unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of a different apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that stunned even the most seasoned forensic professionals. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Gayo Romeo in a small house in Torremolinos, Spain, close to the beaches. On the surface, their life appeared stable. Sabora worked as a waitress, and Marco was a chef. She frequently called her mother, Elisabetta, to reassure her that everything was fine. However, beneath this facade of stability were serious issues that became more apparent over time. When Elisabetta visited, she could immediately sense the tension in their home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco happened even in front of her. Elisabetta noticed that Sabora often tried to excuse Marco's jealousy and anger, attributing them to temporary difficulties. Yet, Elisabetta believed that their problems were much deeper than everyday challenges. Just 2 years ago, Sabora was a very different person. Sabora was born on September 14, 1991, in Albania. She was known for her vibrant and cheerful nature from an early age. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, relocated with her children to Rome, Italy, where they began anew. Sabora quickly became well liked by her peers, earning the nickname Tibby because of her lively and warm personality. Despite facing financial difficulties, she was determined to help her family. She began working as a waitress at a young age but never lost sight of her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a local beauty contest opened doors to the modeling industry. However, her greatest aspiration was to become a teacher, as she truly loved working with children. Things started to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. At that time, she knew very little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed eager to start anew. However, beneath this appealing exterior was a troubled past. Marco had a reputation for aggressive behavior and issues with substance abuse, which had led to multiple encounters with the police. Despite these red flags, Sabora was drawn to his charisma and chose to ignore the warnings. A year into their relationship, Marco proposed that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming that there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to convince her against it, expressing doubts about Marco's intentions, but Sabora was determined. She believed this move would be the start of a new chapter where she and Marco could create a happy life together. Initially, Spain seemed like a great opportunity for Sabora and Marco. Sabora quickly secured a job as a waitress, while Marco found work as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her hopeful plans with her mother. Unfortunately, their stability didn't last long. Marco started losing job after job, often blaming his employers for his failures. His frustration and jealousy intensified, leading to a rise in his aggressive behavior, which escalated from small disagreements to serious conflicts. When Elisabetta visited Spain to check on Sabora, she was taken aback by the situation. Sabora, once vibrant, confident, now appeared withdrawn and subdued. Marco showed his irritation openly in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments became louder. Despite these significant issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, reassuring her mother that everything would get better. Those who knew Sabora were confused about why she ignored the warning signs in her relationship. She may have looked to Marco for the support and stability she missed during her childhood. When her family moved from Albania to Italy, they faced many challenges. Elisabetta worked hard to create a better life for her children, but Sabora had to take on adult responsibilities at a young age. Her relationship with Marco seemed like a way to fill the emotional gap, but instead, it added more stress. Life in Spain was becoming increasingly difficult for Sabora as her youthful dreams faded away. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani vanished unexpectedly, leaving her family in despair. The last time she was heard from was through a text message to Marco, her ex-partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was off and her social media accounts were inactive, which was not typical for her. Earlier, Sabora had told her mother she had finally broken up with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt a sense of freedom. She compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. However, her abrupt silence worried everyone. The situation became even more puzzling when Marco showed up unexpectedly at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to act like a concerned and remorseful man, claiming to care about what had happened. While having coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora might be. Marco explained that they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had left without taking her belongings. However, he later changed his story, saying that a security guard at their apartment complex had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These inconsistent statements raised more suspicions and increased worries. Elisabetta remembered that just a few days before, Sabora had decided to end her relationship with Marco for good after 3 years of attempts to fix things. Despite her efforts to distance herself from him, Marco remained persistently involved in her life. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to Elisabetta, especially considering Sabora's recent breakup and her repeated attempts to cut ties with Marco. Her mother recalled that, before, in 2013, Sabora had even gone back to her mother's home in Italy to leave everything behind, had realized that there was no future for her and Marco. However, Marco refused to let go. He traveled to Italy to see Sabora, begging her to give him another chance and promising to change, even proposing to her. Ultimately, exhausted by their turbulent relationship, Sabora succumbed to his promises. Unfortunately, the same cycle of jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior soon returned, disrupting her peace once again. At one point, Sabora told her mother that if she ever left Marco for good, she might have to disappear completely because she feared he wouldn't let her go. In the following months, Sabora made frequent trips to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports that she may have used a fake Italian ID for these travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter appeared more and more scared, but Sabora rarely provided details about her situation. She only mentioned she was looking for a way to escape her troubles. Her family realized something was seriously wrong. Sabora would never cut off contact with them, especially with her mother and brothers. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that Sabora had chosen to go into hiding to escape Marco's grip. However, the conflicting stories and complete silence from her only raised more concerns. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora's disappearance had not made significant progress, despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Her mother, Elisabetta, was determined to file an official report with the authorities. She strongly believed that Marco, Sabora's ex-partner, was involved, as he was the last person known to have seen her before she disappeared. His behavior during the investigation only deepened suspicions. When questioned, Marco stuck to his story, claiming that Sabora left their home after an argument, after that they lost contact with each other. However, many of her personal items, including clothes and identification, remained in the apartment, which was strange. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her missing to the police. Instead, he claimed he tried to find her himself by printing and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. He also provided conflicting theories about where she might be, suggesting at one point that she had traveled to Argentina or had been seen with an unknown man with whom she allegedly had a confrontation. These statements were inconsistent and lacked credible evidence. Elisabetta, feeling distrustful of Marco, took matters into her own hands to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a specialized organization that helps raise awareness about missing persons cases. As a result, photos of Sabora and requests for information started appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. However, these efforts did not lead to any new information. While Sabora's family continued to search for answers, Marco seemed to be living a fairly normal life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, likely to avoid drawing attention. During this period, he entered into 2 new relationships, both of which ended due to the women complaining about his aggressive behavior. Nevertheless, Marco stayed in Spain, frequently going to the gym and joining a shooting club, which concerned those who knew his background. Sabora's family refused to lose hope. Elisabetta continually urged the police to step up their investigation. As a response, law enforcement began reviewing the case files to identify any overlooked details. They paid close attention to Marco's statements, which had seemed inconsistent from the start. Moreover, there were questions about why he hadn't contacted the police immediately after she went missing. As time went on, public interest in Sabora's case decreased. Despite her family's relentless search for answers, Marco, who was still in Spain, seemed to adapt to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed friendly, focused on fitness and socializing. However, concerns about his character lingered due to his past relationship with Sabora and complaints from his new partners. While Sabora's family held on to hope for updates, the investigation remained stalled. Authorities broadened their search using international missing persons databases, but these efforts produced no leads. For those who knew Sabora well, the uncertainty about her fate was agonizing. By 2023, Marco seemed to have changed his life for the better. He was now living with a new partner, Paula, and they had a child together. Yet, beneath this seemingly fresh start, the same problems that troubled Marco for years persisted. His relationship with Paula was unstable. She confided in close friends and co-workers about experiencing physical abuse from him. During this time, Marco had difficulty maintaining a steady job, which made their financial situation worse. Over time, Paula became more aware of the challenges in Paula and Marco's relationship. She felt that Marco was not only aggressive at work but also unsupportive at home. Despite Paula's efforts to create the appearance of a normal life, her struggles were becoming apparent. For Paula, her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight for her children's custody. Marco's situation was getting worse. He often told his master about his financial problems, stating he was working only for his family's sake. However, his aggressive behavior at work and inability to get along with co-workers made his master wonder if keeping him employed was worth the hassle. Meanwhile, Paula's friend noticed how serious Paula's situation was and encouraged her to stand up against the mistreatment. Despite this, Paula was too afraid to take any confrontational action. She confided in her friend that Marco had hit her 4 times and kicked her, but she minimized the seriousness of these incidents. This indicated that Paula needed immediate help. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula enjoyed her day off, excitedly sharing her plans for a relaxing evening with her coworkers. However, the next day, May 17th, took a tragic turn. Around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting came from the apartment that Paula shared with Marco. Although arguments were common between them, this time it sounded much more severe. Paula's voice was clearly heard, calling for help. Victor, Marco's landlord and boss, could hear a loud disturbance coming from her apartment. Worried, he hurried over with a co-worker from the restaurant. When they arrived at the door, they began knocking and shouting to find out what was going on inside. They heard soft sobbing, which then stopped abruptly. Shortly after, Marco opened the door, appearing calm, and told them everything was fine, saying Paula had just gone to bed. However, the absence of Paula's voice made Victor uneasy. This situation was particularly alarming given recent events. Just days earlier, Victor had fired Marco after a series of troubling incidents, including the mysterious disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had begun to distrust Marco and wanted to prevent any further issues. Now, Marco was involved in another troubling situation. While Victor went to get a spare key to the apartment, the co-worker called the police. Marco, seeming to recognize that the situation was getting serious, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. He suddenly left the apartment and walked out of the building without explanation. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Victor soon returned with a spare key and entered the apartment to investigate further. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body on the floor, stabbed 14 times. Her clothes were drenched in blood, and it was clear she had died several hours prior. The police secured the crime scene and called in forensic experts to gather evidence. They also began searching for Marco, who had fled the scene. Meanwhile, Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Just a few hours later, Marco was found sitting calmly at a cafe table. He did not resist arrest and appeared unfazed by the situation. On May 20th, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with a crime involving aggravating circumstances related to gender-based violence. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation and substance testing. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody during the hearing. He chose to stay silent, only speaking to respond to his lawyer's questions. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani. However, just a few days after his arrest, Sabora's case gained attention again. Marco then made a surprising confession while being interrogated at the police station. He stated that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Despite his confession, law enforcement decided to focus on the investigation into Paula's death first and postpone verifying Marco's claims about Sabora. Elisabetta, Sabora's mother, was devastated by the news of Marco's arrest and his admission about her daughter. For 9 years, she had advocated for a reopening of the investigation, convinced of Marco's involvement in Sabora's disappearance. Marco's confession led to the official reopening of Sabora's case, prompting investigators to validate his statements, starting with a look into the apartment where he and Sabora had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators concentrating on Sabora's case meticulously examined the building layout where she and Marco had lived. A notable detail emerged. There was a large space that should have been part of the bedroom according to the building plans, but it was missing in reality. After receiving permission, investigators entered the apartment on June 6th and broke through the wall. They found a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police discovered important evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among these items was a wilted bouquet of flowers on top. The box also contained several plastic bags, one of which had a camping sleeping bag that held human remains. These remains were sent for forensic analysis to identify the person and determine the cause of death. To confirm the identity, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10th, police visited the home of Sabora Gagani's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed that the recovered remains belonged to Sabora. In the week that followed, new information about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations in Spain, he claimed to have tried to dispose of the body using acid, but this claim could not be verified. Investigators observed that Marco often changed his statements. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of her daughter's remains was heartbreaking. After 9 years of uncertainty, she felt her hope had been taken away, although she had never stopped seeking answers about what happened to her daughter. Over the years, her life had changed significantly. Sabora's father passed away from illness without ever discovering the truth about his daughter. Although her efforts ultimately led to answers, they also brought a bittersweet feeling of closure. Forensic experts are continuing to analyze the evidence collected from the location where Sabora's remains were discovered. A knife found in a plastic bag has been sent for testing to check for biological traces that might connect it to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators are working with their Italian colleagues to gather additional materials related to Sabora's disappearance. Although there is evidence against him and he initially confessed to being involved in Sabora's death, including disclosing where her remains were located, he later took back his confession. Marco's lawyer claims that his statements were made under pressure and should not be accepted as evidence in court. Nevertheless, investigators argue that the items found in a hidden box, including Sabora's personal belongings, give them solid grounds for pursuing further charges. The investigation into Paula's death is still active, with Marco as the main suspect. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora's remains, her family was finally able to hold a burial after all forensic examinations were completed. Her remains were returned to her loved ones in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying heartfelt messages of hope and farewell. Meanwhile, significant attention was on the ongoing legal case against Marco, who was facing charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30th, 2024, Marco presented a handwritten 17-page letter admitting his responsibility for Paula's death, but he included many conditions. He stated that the conflict stemmed from ongoing arguments about shared debts and her infidelity. Marco claimed that he used excessive force in self-defense during the altercation, which led to the tragedy. Marco admitted certain things about Paula, but he was unwilling to give detailed information about Sabora's case. He confirmed that he wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, added lime, and sealed it in a wall. However, he insisted that he was not responsible for her death, claiming that his actions were driven by fear of the situation. During the trial, Marco changed his story about how Sabora died, providing a completely different account. He claimed that the Albanian mafia, which he said he was involved with due to debts, was the one who killed her. According to Marco, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel, but the money was stolen. When he couldn't repay the debt, he said 4 men came to his house, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco stated that he was then threatened with his own life and forced to dispose of her body to avoid more trouble. This version of events raised serious concerns among investigators because Marco had changed his statements multiple times during the investigation. It became clear that he had lied to mislead authorities. There was no evidence to support his claims of mafia involvement. An autopsy revealed that Sabora had died from multiple stab wounds, indicating a violent crime. Sabora's family finally learned the truth about her fake years after she was reported missing. Her mother, Elisabetta, shared that she had spent the last 9 years hoping for answers. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was in progress, and the court moved forward with a jury trial to address charges of domestic violence and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora's case had been reopened but had not yet gone to trial, as investigators continued to examine Marco's claims. Further court proceedings were expected. The experiences of Sabora Gagani and Paula illustrate the harmful effects of relationships characterized by manipulation and abuse. Sabora had aspirations for a promising future, while Paula was working to regain control of her life. Both women were negatively impacted by the same individual. Their stories remind us of the crucial need to identify the early signs of abusive behavior and take action to prevent further harm. The will to live is not something everyone possesses. While some people remain stuck in their problems, a little girl in desperate need of help is fighting against a dangerous psychopath. But what can a child do against someone who has taken many lives? In December 1999, Crystal Searles was just 10 years old. She was known to be hardworking and humble. Despite her youth, she had already faced significant hardships. Unfortunately, what lay ahead for her was worse than anything she had ever experienced. Crystal and her brother were staying with friends of the Harris family in Del Rio, Texas, while waiting for their mother and younger sisters to move from Kansas. December 30th, 1999, seemed like a normal day filled with preparations for the new year. But for some, the arrival of the new millennium was about to take a tragic turn. Mark was Crystal's brother, and they both grew up in Kansas. At that time, Mark was 7 years old and Crystal was 10. They spent the day with the children of the Harris family. Crystal and Mark were welcomed by the Harris family for a while. Crystal quickly adapted by helping with household chores and forming close bonds with everyone. During the New Year holidays, Crystal looked forward to reuniting with her mother and sisters. However, she and Mark struggled to get along, likely due to their age difference and varying interests. The Harris family had several children, with Sean as the eldest, followed by Justin, Lori, and Katie. Sean had already moved out but was planning to return for the holidays. That night, the Harris family planned to go into town to pick up Sean and the two older kids. The result is that Crystal, Katie, and Mark would be left alone at home without any adults around. The house was situated in a remote area, surrounded by nature, with few neighbors nearby. That night, little Mark was scared of the dark, wanted to sleep in the same room as the older girls, Crystal and Katie. However, they pushed him away because they wanted to share a secret. Upset, Mark had to go to the next room. It took him 2 hours to calm down and fall asleep. The next morning, sunlight poured into the room, waking Mark up. The curtains had been pulled back. When he opened his eyes, a strange woman was there. She handed him some clothes, urged him to get ready to leave. When Mark stepped out, he was shocked to find a large pool of blood on the floor, with stains and splatters on the walls and door. The floor was almost completely covered in it. People around him were crying and panicking, but Mark couldn't understand what was going on. He looked for his sister but couldn't find her or Katie. The adults ignored his questions about the girls. When detectives arrived at the house, they were immediately struck by the amount of blood present. In the room where the girls had spent the night, they found 13-year-old Katie lying on the floor, unresponsive. It was clear from her severe injuries that she had fought for her life but had ultimately succumbed to a fatal cut to her throat, resulting in blood loss. In contrast, Crystal was fortunate to have survived the attack by an unknown assailant, although she was in critical condition. At around 6 a.m. on December 31st, 1999, Pam Searles, Crystal's mother, received a call. They asked for her permission to perform an emergency operation because her daughter was in critical condition with a severe throat injury. Pam was in shock and struggled to understand what had happened. Crystal quickly became an important witness for the police, even as she battled for her life in a local hospital's operating room. After a successful surgery, she was placed on life support, including a ventilator, as she was unable to breathe independently. When her mother arrived at the hospital, Crystal's condition had improved. The surgeon had managed to save her life, but her trachea and vocal cords had sustained serious injuries. Despite her state, Crystal's main concern was whether her friend Katie had survived. However, Pam did not have the strength to tell her that her friend had died. As soon as Crystal woke up after the surgery, she wanted to speak to the police to tell them what had happened. According to Crystal, she and her friend had gone to bed quite late. She had no idea what time it was when she was awakened by a scream. Raising her head from the top bunk, she saw a man with disheveled hair, a thick beard, and dark, angry eyes standing in front of her. She immediately noticed that Katie was bleeding and that this stranger had a knife in his hand. He covered Katie's mouth with his hand, slowly cutting her throat. The attacker hadn't noticed Crystal at first and was about to leave, but when Katie fell to the floor and began to make death rattles, Crystal recoiled involuntarily when their eyes met. Turning around one last time, the criminal spotted Crystal on the top bunk. Terrified, she tried to climb down to escape through the open window. With a quick movement, he caught up with her and cut her throat as well. Then the stranger disappeared from the house. Despite her injury, Crystal was able to crawl. She climbed down from the top bunk with difficulty and headed for the bedroom door. On the way, she bumped into her friend, who was still making hoarse sounds, and then went quiet. Crystal lay down next to Katie, hugged her, and wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, but she couldn't. In that moment, she realized that she was mute. The criminal had severed her vocal cords. She was unable to utter a single word clearly. Suddenly, Crystal realized that she needed to ask for help. The phone was useless in her case, so she wrote a note asking for help and decided to get to the neighbors. With her throat cut, Crystal crawled out onto the terrace of the house, dressed in her pajamas and without shoes, but she saw a light in the distance, realized that it was her goal. Crystal stood up with difficulty and walked slowly toward the light. When she reached the neighboring house, which was a good distance away, she began to pound on the door. Then she heard a man's voice asking who was there. Unable to speak, she continued to knock as hard as she could until he opened the door. The neighbor saw the bloody girl, read the note, and called the police. Crystal's brother was unharmed because he had been in another room where the attacker had not entered. Based on the words of Crystal, a composite sketch was created. A check of the police database revealed several potential suspects with various convictions. The next day, the police returned to Crystal and presented several photographs for identification. Crystal confidently pointed to the image of Tommy Lynn Sells, who immediately became the prime suspect. At that time, he was in Del Rio, having arrived relatively recently. Up until that point, he had committed only minor offenses, but Crystal recognized that empty, cruel look instantly. The detectives decided to investigate him. When Tommy's door was knocked on early in the morning, he was informed that he was under arrest for murder. He came out to meet the police and immediately stated that he was glad he was finally caught because he was tired of committing these acts. Initially, the police did not grasp the alarming significance of Tommy's words. He told them about the murder weapon, which turned out to be a 30-centimeter butcher knife. He had used it often over the years, and the blade had been sharpened regularly. It had simply broken. The man had thrown the knife in the bushes near his home, where it was found with traces of blood. Tommy was taken to the county sheriff's office. From the beginning, he willingly cooperated with the authorities, confessed without hesitation to the murder of Katie and the attempted murder of Crystal. He was surprised when he learned about the surviving girl. Tommy agreed to reconstruct the events in the house where he had killed Katie. His behavior seemed odd considering the terrible crimes being discussed. At the same time, he was clearly sealing his own fate by cooperating with the authorities. Tommy began to recount the details of the night of the crime. He explained that as soon as he approached the house, he noticed the open window, which made it easier for him to enter. He walked down the hallway, saw different children sleeping in various rooms, and then chose one with a bunk bed. He entered quietly, approached the lower bunk. Tommy began stabbing and cut Katie's throat. Before leaving, he noticed the second girl and also cut her throat. The detectives managed to find out he had been friends with the Harris family for a long time. It was suspected that, based on this relationship, he had planned the attack on Katie in advance, likely intending to abuse her. Tommy did indeed abuse Katie first, then killed her because he was thirsty for blood. Before arriving at the Harris house, he had intended to break into a trailer where 6 people lived. He knew them and wanted to kill them all, but he feared they might fight back, so he changed his mind at the last moment, sought easier prey. He had heard that the Harris family was hosting a couple of children and that they might be alone that night. Crystal's mother felt guilty for not being there for her daughter during such a terrible time in her life, but she had been forced to settle various issues before moving. To better understand what had happened, she expressed a desire to visit the crime scene. Upon arriving, she witnessed a scene that resembled a horror movie, with an entire floor covered in blood. Crystal had run for help with her last strength, leaving bloody handprints on the wall. Immediately after his arrest, Tommy behaved quite calmly. He was being transported to prison when he shocked the law enforcement officers by suggesting that they probably wanted to know about all the other murders he had committed. This surprised all the police officers, especially since they hadn't even asked him about other possible crimes before. Detectives usually avoid allowing journalists to be present during interrogations, as this could lead to important information being widely publicized and having unpredictable consequences. However, this time, the situation was serious. There were numerous murders involved. Ultimately, the decision was made to allow the media to participate in the interviews, which would quickly spread Tommy's story across the country, potentially help find people who had also survived his attacks and could identify their assailant. A reliable journalist, trusted by the police, was chosen for this purpose and was able to convey Tommy's story clearly, without distortion. The journalist sat in the interrogation room for hours, listening to Tommy recount stories of his life, describing his journeys from state to state while killing men, women, and children without remorse. He was a cold-blooded madman, recounting real bloody scenes as if they were made-up campfire horror stories. Among the most vivid childhood memories that Tommy shared was his father's phrase, "Dead men don't talk." From the start, He doubted that any of his victims could have survived the attack. In his opinion, Crystal was very lucky, but it was unlikely that anyone else had been so fortunate. Even at this stage, the extent of his madness was unclear. Over the next 9 months, he communicated regularly with detectives in the presence of a journalist. In total, he described 22 murders that he committed with his own hands. There were other unconfirmed incidents that could not be verified. Clearly, many more crimes had been committed. This man's words were corroborated by his knife, which he had used all these years to take the lives of innocents. The blade had been sharpened so many times that it became very thin and resembled a slate. The butcher knife didn't even look like a kitchen tool, it resembled something from a torture chamber. After all these events, surgeries, discharge, talking to detectives and journalists, Crystal was gradually recovering. She was shocked by the extent of her injuries. A long scar remained on her throat after the surgery, and she cried when she saw it for the first time. Her mother took her to Kansas, away from the scene of the massacre, but they still had to return to Texas for her to testify against the serial killer. 9 months had passed since the murder and attempted murder. Tommy's stories about other crimes had ended. Crystal was 11 years old by this point. She managed to partially recover, but only physically. Psychologically, she continued to struggle with the consequences of the horrors she had witnessed, as well as the cruelty of the madmen she now had to testify against in court. She was the main witness for the prosecution. From the very beginning, the situation was tense. Crystal had not seen the criminal since the night he slit her friend's throat before her eyes, almost killing her. It was hard for everyone caught up in Tommy's villainy. During the hearings in Texas, Crystal was taken in by Texas Ranger Johnny Allen, who was a family man with 2 children at the time. Crystal met their daughters, hoping that this would help distract her from her situation. According to the family, Crystal would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, thrashing around in bed as if trying to escape from someone. Everyone knew this was what her nightmares were about, but the girl was determined not to give up. Tommy's lawyer also had a difficult task ahead of him. He knew all too well that his client was a dangerous serial criminal who had taken dozens of lives for no reason. His only strategy was to try to avoid capital punishment. He was not going to deny the charges. Despite the adults' concerns, Crystal even spoke enthusiastically about the upcoming meeting with Tommy. She understood that now he would not have a chance to attack her, so she was not afraid. She simply wanted to achieve a fair punishment for this monster. Crystal comforted herself with the thought that she was the reason he was caught and that she had stopped the chain of murders at his hands. According to the prosecutor's office, if Crystal had not miraculously survived that attack and pointed out Tommy, he would have continued his bloody spree across the United States. Who knows how many more people could have died from his knife? The courageous schoolgirl thought that by doing this, she was pursuing justice and vengeance for her friend who had been killed. Up until the day of her testimony, Crystal felt very inspired. That morning, she woke up to find her mother so worried that she was in tears. She asked her mother to calm down so that she wouldn't be distracted from this important moment that could help them stop the serial killer. During the hearings, Crystal once again demonstrated her fortitude. She walked to the stand when called to testify, passing mere centimeters away from the criminal. Although she could have chosen to enter through a specially prepared secret door for such cases, she expressed a desire to walk past the assailant who had cut her throat. She stated that she was not afraid of the man. At one point, however, her determination wavered slightly. While Crystal was on the stand, Tommy displayed no panic, nervousness, or tears. He didn't even look at her while she spoke and answered questions. Crystal confirmed that it was this man who had slit her and her friend's throats, pointing at him. Conversely, he appeared to be impatiently waiting for a decision, which made Crystal increasingly nervous. Eventually, the tension overwhelmed her. She burst into tears and could no longer speak. The court took a forced 15-minute break to allow the prosecution's main witness to compose herself. After the break, Crystal returned to her previous resolve, showing the jury her scar across her throat, a mark that the defendant had left on her body for the rest of her life. Then there was a demonstration of the attack. Crystal lay on a makeshift table that was meant to represent a bed, showing how the attacker had stabbed her with a knife. This allowed the jury to comprehend the scale of the cruelty and horror that the child had endured. The girl illustrated how she had tried to cover her throat with her hands, having witnessed what Tommy had done to her friend, not wanting to share the same fate. Perhaps this instinct is what saved her from a fatal hemorrhage that could have killed her within minutes. The courage of the 11-year-old schoolgirl was acknowledged by her lawyer. Instead of cross-examining her, the defense attorney praised her and did not ask a single question. At that moment, it became clear that even a serial killer's defense attorney was on the side of the victims. No one expected the trial to be so short, especially in such a high-profile case. However, the jury returned with a verdict after about an hour of deliberation. They found the defendant guilty of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. Now only one question remained: would he receive life in prison or the death penalty? The final stage of the trial was set. No one suspected that the brave little girl sitting in front of everyone actually harbored other secrets. Mark Searles, Crystal's father, believed he understood why his daughter had such a strong, determined character, which enabled her to confront this monster. He was convinced that she simply knew what to do. According to Mark, he and Pam began using illegal substances 5 years before these tragic events. He claimed that the addiction quickly took over they, subjecting them to a tumultuous cycle of attempting to recover and then falling back into addiction. They began to quarrel more frequently, and things spiraled out of control. Mark got into serious legal trouble, which only worsened over time. Meanwhile, Pam desperately sought to restore her normal life, distance herself from anything related to illegal activities. Ultimately, she filed for divorce, focused on overcoming her addiction. Pam got herself together and concentrated on her children. However, years earlier, Crystal had assumed the role of caretaker, as she was the eldest girl in the family. She recalled a time when her parents were dependent, how her father could sleep all day without regaining consciousness. As a result, she was forced to care for her younger siblings. Naturally, she also attended school. Despite her young age, the schoolgirl began to grasp the harsh realities of life. She became a reliable support for her mother, changed her sister's diapers, fed them, put them to bed, prepared for school in the mornings, and even cooked her own meals. By her own admission, Crystal felt like the unluckiest girl in her class, as others did not face such struggles. Crystal was never driven to or picked up from school, nor did she receive help. Of course, this situation seemed unjust. On the other hand, would she have been able to ask for help if not for the independence forced upon her in her early years? According to her sisters, during that time, Crystal took on the responsibilities of both her mother and father, with many not even knowing what her parents looked like because she shouldered almost all of the family responsibilities. Crystal remembered the moment her mother, Pam, decided to end it all. Pam managed to quit and gradually return to a normal life. However, from her recollections, her father remained entrenched in criminal circles. He could not quit, and many believed he didn't even try. By Mark's own admission, he couldn't stop using and selling banned substance, finding himself drawn into criminal schemes, fearing that leaving that lifestyle would be a dangerous decision. After Pam and the children moved out, Mark was arrested a few months later. Pam felt relieved to have left him, as staying with him might have jeopardized her dreams of a new life. He ended up in jail because of his criminal connections. His daughters was so angry with him that she simply stopped answering his calls, blaming him for choosing illegal substances over family. Mark he learned about the attack on his daughter. At that moment, he was behind bars and could not help her in any way. At the time of the attack, Mark was serving a sentence for the sale and possession of illegal substances. He was in prison for about 3 months. Suddenly, at 10 a.m., an unexpected visit occurred, as it was outside the permitted visiting hours. The matter was urgent. His mother and sister came to inform him about what had happened to Crystal. Emotions ran high. If he had not been incarcerated, he would have torn Tommy apart with his own hands. Naturally, this didn't change much. Mark couldn't change anything, not even be present in court to support his daughter. But at that moment, something shifted in him. He rethought his life, which had brought his daughter to that house on that fateful night. If it weren't for his problems, no one would have attacked Crystal. Meanwhile, there was one main issue to be resolved: determining what punishment the serial killer would receive for the murder of Katie and the attempted murder of Crystal. Pam had wanted the death penalty for the attacker from the very beginning. Crystal initially supported this decision, but gradually she concluded that she did not want to become like that creature who thirsted for blood. She advocated for a life sentence instead. However, compared to crimes, the prosecutor's office demanded the death penalty. The jury supported this initiative. In the end, Tommy was sentenced to death. The court believed that this would allow him to atone not only for Katie and Crystal but for all of his other victims. He eluded authorities for 20 years and was finally stopped thanks to a brave schoolgirl. Tommy Lynn Sells was born in Oakland, California, on June 28, 1964, one of 5 children of a single mother. He hardly knew his father. Tommy's sister fell ill and died when she was only 1.5 years old. After that, he was sent to live with his aunt, where he behaved poorly. He was returned to his mother, who did not want him. By the age of 7, Tommy had begun to drink alcohol and soon became the victim of abuse by an adult man. From the age of 10, he became addicted to banned substance and troubled his grandmother. All family members began to fear him, eventually kicked him out of the house. From the age of 14, Tommy began to wander. When he was 17, he found his mother and began to molest her in the shower. He was placed in a psychiatric clinic where he was diagnosed with several disorders, including bipolar disorder. However, the treatment did not help. His condition worsened due to alcohol and substance abuse. According to Tommy, he committed his first murder at 15, on July 5, 1979, in Port Gibson, Mississippi, when he shot and killed 39-year-old John Kay during a home invasion. Witnesses described a suspect who resembled Tommy. The violence escalated from there. The next attack occurred on April 27, 1982, in St. Louis, Missouri, when 35-year-old Joanne Tate, 35, was abused and murdered in her home. Notably, another man had already been convicted and was serving time for this crime, but he was later exonerated. Tommy committed several murders of single mothers with children, breaking into their homes at night, kidnapping the children from their homes, abusing, and killing them in various ways. The style of each crime was different, so detectives did not see a connection between the attacks. The criminal did not spare anyone, even small children. Sometimes he would meet a future victim, gain her trust, enter her house, then kill her and her children. Tommy's most horrific murder was the attack on the Dardine family, where he killed 4 people at once. On November 17, 1987, while hitchhiking, he was picked up by 29-year-old Keith Dardine, who kindly brought him home for dinner. But instead of gratitude, Tommy shot Keith and then beat his 3-year-old son to death. He then proceeded to assault the pregnant wife of the homeowner, who gave birth to a baby girl during the attack. He killed both the wife and the newborn. Tommy's last known crime was the attack on Kathy and Crystal. For some of the 22 established murders, he received life sentences in various states. For others, he was never convicted, believing that the death penalty would suffice. Despite the fact that Crystal had defeated a serial killer, she had mixed feelings. She did not feel joy at the upcoming execution of Tommy, as she had never been the kind of person who indulged in such things, no matter who the perpetrator was. However, she did not challenge the verdict. Now, Crystal faced a much harder and longer struggle. Her parents were confident that she would cope with the consequences of the attack. Her mother and sisters rallied around her, even sleeping together in the same bed to provide support. Unfortunately, this did not always allow Crystal to rest fully. At times, she could spend an entire night without blinking, staring at the closed window of her room. By her own admission, during such moments, she thought about her escape routes in case of an attack. If the criminal entered through that window, she knew to run out through the other one. And if he entered through the door, she also knew how to hide quickly. In addition, it was important for Crystal to know that her loved ones were nearby. The girl felt reassured simply by the fact that her mother and sisters were alive and breathing. She could sense it. Gradually, Crystal began to regain her sense of self. Her father, Mark, spent 3 years behind bars. When he was released, he immediately sought to improve his relationship with his daughter, who had miraculously survived the attack of a serial killer. He understood that she needed support and help. She saw her father on the right path, even attending her graduation. However, Crystal felt that the relationship with her father was still a struggle. Their relationship continued to improve gradually, and both looked at it positively. Crystal was in a mentally difficult situation. It was not easy for her to feel joy despite an unconditional victory while her friend had died. Gradually, she returned to her usual life and became like a mother to the younger members of the family. Later, she spoke repeatedly with journalists, sharing that she cannot psychologically develop trust in people. Because of this, she has difficulties with relationships, although she genuinely wants to build a family. Nevertheless, Crystal still believes in the best. She even saw her father cope, quit crime and addiction, gradually make up for lost time. She is now 35 years old. Crystal is close to her family and constantly remembers her friend who was killed before her eyes. The events of that terrible night remain etched in her memory. Little is known about her personal life at the moment. On January 3, 2014, a judge set Tommy's execution date. The death sentence by lethal injection was carried out on April 3, 2014, at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. Crystal and members of the Harris family were present at the execution. In the Italian province of Bergamo, the municipality of Cologno al Sirios has around 10,000 residents. Femicides are a significant concern here, with many women being harmed by their former or current partners. In 2019, Zinaida Solinari, a 36-year-old woman originally from a small village in Moldova, was living in Cologno al Sirios. She had resided in Italy for nearly 15 years and had made some progress toward achieving her dreams. Like many young women who leave their home countries in search of a better life, Zinaida aimed to establish herself abroad. She arrived in Italy in 2004 at the age of 21, hoping to find employment and eventually a husband to create a happy life. Right after moving to Bergamo, Zinaida began her new life and work. She was a vibrant and attractive young woman who received a lot of attention from men, but she was not looking for a short-term fling. She wanted to find a husband. A few years later, she met a man named Maurizio Quattrochi, who was 11 years older than her. He appeared trustworthy and kind. She was immediately drawn to him. It's important to mention that Zinaida lived with her daughter, whom she had at the age of 16. At the time of their move, her daughter was 5 years old. Maurizio welcomed her daughter as if she were his own and later adopted her. Zinaida hadn't yet made many friends in Bergamo. From the start, Maurizio treated her and her daughter beautifully, offering a sense of security that won Zinaida over. They began a relationship that quickly became serious. Maurizio was a painter and bricklayer with a troubled past that included several criminal offenses, which he chose not to share with Zinaida, a fact she later discovered. He had been convicted multiple times for buying stolen property and had several instances of driving under the influence. Despite this history, he treated Zinaida and her daughter with great care. In late 2004, they married. The following year they welcomed their first daughter, with a second daughter arriving 4 years later. Maurizio was dedicated to his family, but he had a fiery temperament. Zinaida affectionately called him a hot Italian, believing it to be part of his charm. She worked to smooth over any tensions. For many years, their relationship appeared loving and understanding. However, beneath the surface, there were troubling issues. Zinaida's family soon learned about Mauricio's bad temper. He was impulsive and aggressive. His jealousy began to strain their relationship, particularly after Zinaida took a job as a waitress at a popular restaurant in mid-2019. Maurizio was unhappy with her job because many men frequented the restaurant, and his financial struggles heightened his jealousy. Especially as Zinaida's salary allowed her more independence, made her the family's primary earner. At the restaurant, Zinaida met a woman, who was also from Eastern Europe. They discovered they had a lot in common. Her colleagues soon noticed the tension between Zinaida and her husband, Maurizio. During Zenaida's first week at her new job, Maurizio came to the restaurant because she hadn't answered his calls. He raised his voice at her, and her colleague could see that Zenaida flinched at every loud sound, revealing her fear of her husband. After that incident, Zenaida shared with her colleague that Maurizio was jealous, upset because she had become more independent and had slipped out of his control. Despite this, Zenaida was determined to stand her ground, not give in to his demands, so she continued working at the restaurant, hoping that her husband would eventually adjust and stop pressuring her. The situation was worsening, seemed to be getting out of control. Her colleague noticed that after several months of working at the restaurant, Zenaida had lost a significant amount of weight and appeared very anxious, which was quite concerning. Zenaida usually dealt with her problems on her own, seldom talked about her life. However, it was clear that her marriage was failing. After 13 years, Zenaida realized it was time for a change. She understood how dangerous her husband was after a fight that occurred just before the tragedy. Unfortunately, she didn't have time to respond. Around 2 a.m. on October 6, 2019, the city police received a report about a woman who had been injured. When officers arrived at Via Alberto de Giussano, it was too late to help her. She had already died. The woman was 36-year-old Zenaida Solinari. Police quickly interviewed her family and friends. Zenaida was found in the courtyard of her sister Oksana Solinari's house, where she had been living recently. Oksana had moved to Italy after Zenaida, and her life had been more settled since marrying Lucio Carlo Di Dio. Oksana informed the police about the difficulties Zenaida faced in her marriage. She believed the event was a result of Mauricio's ongoing aggressive behavior. Just before the tragedy, Zenaida had made the decision to leave her husband, believing it was her only option after a recent family conflict. In private, Zenaida confided in Oksana that Maurizio had threatened her, saying if she tried to leave, he would kill her and then take his own life. From that point, Zenaida understood that the man she thought was her protector could actually be a serious threat to her safety. She shared her experiences of aggression, physical abuse, and how she had to call the police after her last fight with Maurizio. At that time, Zenaida had 3 children, but her husband was indifferent and consumed by jealousy. He was behaving violently, and it was only when the police arrived that he calmed down. Although Zenaida chose not to file formal charges against him, she spoke to the police out of fear for her safety. She thought that moving out of the house was the best way to protect herself and her children. After leaving, she hoped Maurizio would eventually calm down so they could officially get divorced. However, Zenaida did not recognize that the period when a woman tries to escape the control of an abusive partner is often the most dangerous time, both during the decision to separate and the act of leaving. Zenaida opened up to several friends about her husband's frequent episodes of intense jealousy. She shared that he not only yelled at her but also physically assaulted her. However, when speaking with detectives, she did not mention the threats of violence. She minimized the severity of her situation, claiming that her husband had never physically harmed her until mid-2019, despite his aggressive demeanor and constant emotional pressure. Zenaida believed she could manage her circumstances alone. Just 2 hours before she was murdered, a patrol of carabinieri drove by her sister's house. Oksana was aware that Maurizio was searching for his wife. He had come to visit her that evening and hadn't been seen since. Concerned for safety, Oksana called the police. The carabinieri checked the area but left without finding anything suspicious. Later that evening, Oksana's husband mentioned seeing a car that looked like Mauricio's parked in a dead end, but they could not locate its owner. If the police officers had been more vigilant, they might have noticed something amiss and potentially prevent the crime. Maurizio Quattrochi was 47 years old, had a history of a bad temper. Recently, he lost his job as a bricklayer, a position he had held for several years. This wasn't the first instance of him being fired. He was previously let go from his job as a cook at a pizzeria due to conflicts with management. Although Maurizio had always been aggressive, Zenaida usually managed to calm him down. However, after losing his job, his anger intensified. He struggled with the pressure of not being able to support his family, which only added to his irritation, especially towards Zenaida's accomplishments. On the evening of October 5th, he was waiting for Zinaida to return home while intoxicated. Just days earlier, Zinaida and her children had moved in with her sister, Oksana, seeking refuge without revealing her plans. She felt there were no other options for support and thought that staying with her sister would allow the children to continue going to their previous school. Zinaida also underestimated the likelihood of Maurizio acting on his threats. She wanted to avoid causing additional stress for their children. The next day after Zinaida moved out, Maurizio quickly found her at his relative's house. They had another uncomfortable conversation, but this time Zinaida chose not to involve the police. She wanted to prevent anyone else from getting hurt and still hoped that Maurizio, with whom she had spent 13 years, would act rationally. Sadly, he had started to see her as an object, making rationality unlikely. Tragically, Zinaida was found outside her sister's house with several stab wounds, some of which were life-threatening. The attacker had cut her throat and stabbed her in the chest, leading to severe blood loss. She died before the ambulance could reach her. At that moment, her 3 daughters were asleep just a few meters away from their mother. When the carabinieri arrived, Maurizio was already gone, having fled the scene of the crime. However, Zinaida's sister had important information about him. Oksana, who was close to her sister, knew details about Mauricio's job, his favorite hangouts, and his car. Her husband, Lucio, noted that an old Peugeot 206 was parked in an alley and that car drove away in it right after the attack. Witnesses provided the police with the vehicle's license plate, allowing them to start the search for him immediately. The police first searched Mauricio's house but found no one there. They then checked his previous workplaces but found them empty as well. He had gone on the run, but there were only a few possible escape routes. The carabinieri were pursuing the suspect and were closing in. However, they worried he might abandon his car and hide in the wilderness. The police monitored checkpoints and cameras along the potential escape paths. Maurizio was quickly located, and a large-scale operation was planned to capture him. They set up checkpoints on the road and stopped cars that matched his description. Despite this, Maurizio managed to briefly slip through the barrier. His escape lasted just under 16 hours. Eventually, a man matching his description was seen walking along the road, several hundred kilometers from the murder scene. Surprisingly, he hadn't traveled far from Oksana's house, as if he was unsure of what to do and was aimlessly wandering while trying to come up with a plan. He was stopped and arrested at the city entrance. The alleged criminal was taken to Treviglio station, charged with first-degree murder, and sent to prison in Bergamo. At this point, Maurizio claimed that Zinaida's death was accidental, insisting he never wanted to hurt his beloved wife. However, her sister, Oksana, reminded him of his earlier threats to kill Zinaida. Oksana was aware that Maurizio had long suspected Zinaida of cheating, frequently accusing her of having affairs with other men, even though there was no truth to those claims. She firmly believed that Zinaida had remained faithful in their marriage, but Maurizio was not convinced. The situation may have worsened due to Mauricio's job loss and Zinaida's newfound independence. She recognized that their family was struggling and that they needed money for basic necessities. Taking a job at a restaurant was her way of supporting herself, her husband, and their children. Unbeknownst to her, this decision stirred intense anger in Maurizio. Rather than being encouraging, he grew increasingly jealous and resentful. His behavior could have been exacerbated by the depression often linked to such issues, but this did not lessen his guilt. Mauricio's behavior was similar to stalking. Maurizio bombarded Zinaida with constant work calls, which severely affected her ability to perform her job. He insisted on constant contact, even asked for photos to prove where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. Her employer noticed her frequent distractions and advised her to turn off her mobile phone, hoping this would alleviate the situation with her husband. Unfortunately, this only made things worse. Rather than stop his interference, Maurizio started arriving at the restaurant and causing dramatic scenes. Each time, his behavior became more concerning. All these incidents were verified by a friend of Zinaida, whom she met at the restaurant. Although Zinaida preferred not to complain, she shared with her sister that she was overwhelmed by ongoing scandals at home. After long days at work, she would return to face constant accusations of infidelity and jealousy-driven arguments. Trying to defend herself felt pointless. By the end of summer 2019, she experienced physical violence at home for the first time. Instead of addressing their problems and looking for a job, Maurizio turned to drinking, which led to conflicts, left her with bruises. After interviewing the suspect, detectives determined that jealousy was the motive behind this act of femicide. They investigated Mauricio's background to confirm the statements made by Zenaida's relatives and friends. He seemed to be a typical manipulator who was losing control over Zenaida. After losing his last job due to a conflict with his boss, he could only find odd jobs that didn't provide enough income to support the family. This situation led him to alcoholism and increasingly abusive behavior. In contrast, Zenaida was working as a waitress and occasionally as a hotel maid. She also earned extra income through modeling. It became clear that she no longer needed this relationship. From what was known, Maurizio spoke negatively about Zenaida's modeling career, convinced that it was linked to other men, leading him to believe that she was unfaithful. Although he could not find any evidence to support this, he was equally unable to convince his spouse otherwise. After the Carabinieri were first called due to a domestic dispute involving threats, they assessed Mauricio's behavior and advised Zenaida to move out. It was generally accepted that her refusal to file a complaint contributed to her death. Maurizio continued to assert that his attack was unintentional, claiming he simply wanted to talk to his wife and that she was the one who first exhibited aggression. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation contradicted these assertions. Zenaida had remained calm, diffusing all hostility, and consistently tried to avoid conflict. In contrast, everyone who knew Maurizio well described him as extraordinarily aggressive, hot-tempered, and controlling. The fact that the Carabinieri could not find him during their patrol confirmed suspicions that he had set up an ambush and was in hiding. He possessed a kitchen knife, which became the weapon used in the murder. It could not have ended up in his hands by chance. He had taken it with him intentionally, having planned to confront Zenaida from the very beginning. According to the reconstruction of events, late on Saturday evening, Zenaida was returning home from a night shift at the restaurant. The last message she received from her loved ones was a warning. Around midnight, Oksana wished her sister a safe journey and advised her to be careful. When speaking to the police, Oksana expressed that she had a bad feeling, which is why she wrote this message to Zenaida. She had no idea that the future killer was already waiting for his victim outside the house. Zenaida barely managed to stop near the gate of Oksana's house and got out of her car. She had walked only 3 meters when Maurizio attacked her with a kitchen knife, striking her several times with force. However, Zenaida did not lose consciousness. Instead, she began to scream. This noise awakened her neighbors and her sister, who called for help. Unfortunately, the criminal had enough time to inflict a fatal wound on his victim. Even after the neighbors raised a ruckus, he continued the attack, unable to control the anger fueled by jealousy. Realizing what had happened, Maurizio jumped into his car and began to flee. However, this reckless escape was ill-conceived, as there was nowhere for him to hide. The day of Zenaida Solinari's funeral was declared the day of mourning in the city. This tragic news shocked not only the numerous members of the city's Moldovan community, but also all other residents. Flags were lowered, and many local establishments were closed. A memorial service was held, attended by an Orthodox priest from Bergamo. Hundreds of concerned citizens came to the church for the vigil, all appalled by the tragic fate of this kind and beautiful woman. White flowers lay on the white coffin, and red ribbons, a symbol of the fight against femicide, were tied at the feet of local residents. Red roses were placed around a fountain in the main square, and candles were lit. Meanwhile, the suspect remained defiant. His story changed several times, resulting in no one believing him anymore. During another interrogation, Maurizio claimed that the meeting was simply to communicate with his wife. After consuming a considerable amount of alcohol, he insisted that he felt a surge of jealousy, which had become increasingly frequent. Throughout the day, he had contacted his wife. Even if Maurizio genuinely wanted to know what his wife was doing that evening, the response did not satisfy him. He attacked her while checking her mobile phone. The carabinieri discovered that earlier that evening, at about 6 p.m., Oksana had informed her that Maurizio had come to her house looking to see his children. Naturally, Zinaida refused, as she immediately noticed that he was drunk. She told him he could only see his daughters the next day when he had sobered up. This likely intensified Mauricio's jealousy, suggesting that he may have been lying in wait near the house for several hours before attacking his victim. Initially, Maurizio insisted that it was all an accident, then claimed he did not remember anything. His final explanation was that he did not want to kill Zinaida but was unable to control himself due to jealousy. His lies did not clarify whether he had truly been waiting there all that time with a knife or if he had left and returned after the carabinieri had checked the area. Maurizio maintained that he could not recall anything because of the alcohol he had consumed and even denied bringing a knife with him, claiming he could have found it near his sister Zinaida's house. During interrogations, he also stated that his wife loved him, that she did not deserve such an end, that he believed until the very end that they could be together again and everything would work out. Oksana and Lucio countered this claim, stating that it was a lie. Zinaida had fled because she was afraid of him, felt under constant pressure and control. At the hearing, one of the first to speak was her sister, 32-year-old Oksana. She recounted how she heard a muffled cry for help in her sleep. Instinctively, she felt it was Zinaida. Upon opening her eyes, she heard it again and realized she was right. She immediately woke her husband, and together they rushed into the street, where they saw Maurizio. The attack was ongoing. He was holding Zinaida by the throat, striking her repeatedly. The prosecutor's office rightly labeled this act an extreme form of cruelty, as the criminal was completely out of control. Even in front of witnesses, the assault continued. This brutal act left 3 children without a mother and father. Oksana's words were substantiated by her husband, Lucio, his brother, Alessandro, and her neighbor, Riccardo Pacini. They all witnessed the moment of the attack but did not have time to intervene. Everything happened too quickly. When they approached, Maurizio fled. Zinaida's 18-year-old daughter, Vitalia, also participated in the trial. Mauricio's 2 youngest daughters, aged 9 and 13, were not present in the courtroom. They did not want to interact with their father, who had left them orphaned. The girls were placed in Oksana's care. During the hearing, a forensic expert testified that he found 18 wounds on Zinaida's body. 3 of these wounds were inflicted on her face and were identified as defensive injuries on the victim's arms. Another 8 wounds were located on her neck, indicating that this was likely the target area of the killer, as his actions did not correspond with typical unintentional murder. One of the most dangerous blows punctured the aorta at the base of her neck, resulting in severe bleeding. Just a few minutes later, Zinaida lost consciousness and subsequently died. Her relatives held her in their arms during her final moments as she faded before their eyes, bleeding to death until the rescue service arrived. Her last words were, "I can't breathe anymore." Only after hearing her last words did he decide to flee. At that moment, a kitchen knife fell to the ground, which was later found by the police. The prosecution insisted that the attack was premeditated, as the knife found matched one from Mauricio's kitchen set, which was missing from his home. The lawyer tried to justify the defendant in an implausible manner, claiming that he had found a blade near his sister Zinaida's house. Despite this, Mauricio's lawyer continued to advocate for a mitigated sentence and insisted on a psychiatric examination. According to the lawyer, there had been a systematic deterioration in Mauricio's mental state, which became apparent several days before the crime. On that day, Zinaida stated that he had become obsessive, possessive, and much more aggressive than usual. Just before the incident, Zinaida told her sister that her husband had tried to strangle her with a belt from a rope. When Oksana's husband came to help with a move, he noticed that Zinaida's internet cables had been cut, which seemed strange. Furthermore, Maurizio took her mobile phone, indicating that the situation was spiraling out of control. The lawyer believed these were signs of mental problems. However, the relatives of Zinaida did not want to allow the killer to receive a lenient sentence due to claims of insanity. Oksana claimed that her sister had considered breaking up 8 years before the tragedy. Oksana said Zinaida felt like a victim and was afraid that her husband could be dangerous, but she stayed in the relationship for the sake of their children. Zenaida's relatives said she described a miserable 10-year marriage. Maurizio ended his own life, as he had promised, while in custody during the trial. His lawyer commented on his client's death. The hearing shocked Maurizio. He could not bear the shame and disgrace, especially since some aspects, according to him, did not correspond to reality. He was particularly taken aback by witness testimonies that described 10 years of torment, during which his wife had suffered and was denied a divorce. Maurizio expressed regret for his actions but realized he could not turn back time to alter the circumstances of his wife's death. He feared that his daughters would be compelled to testify against him, which would have been an even greater blow. Consequently, Maurizio decided to end his life. He left several suicide notes for his family, but their contents remain unknown. The brutal murder of Zenaida Solinari on October 6, 2019, in Cologno al Sirios marked a devastating loss for her family and the community. Fleeing an abusive marriage, Zenaida sought refuge with her sister Oksana days earlier, hoping to protect her 3 daughters. Her courage to reclaim her independence triggered Maurizio Quattroci's jealousy, culminating in a premeditated attack that ended her life. The court's focus on the crime's brutality underscored the gravity of femicide, a persistent issue in Bergamo, where women like Zenaida faced danger from intimate partners. Zenaida's story is a stark reminder of the urgent need for stronger protections and awareness to prevent such tragedies, ensuring no woman pays the ultimate price for seeking freedom. On the evening of October 24, 2009, 58-year-old Christy Marks, a successful professional and caring mother, set out from her home filled with hope. She was on her way to reconnect with her daughter, Taylor Marks, who was 20 years old. She had been adopted by Christy years earlier. Earlier that day, Taylor had called Christy, asking her to pick her up from her boyfriend Brian Smith's house. This request was a surprising sign of reconciliation after a difficult period between them. Around 7 p.m., Christy arrived at Brian's house, located in Akron, Ohio, an area known for its high crime rates and general unease. Despite her concerns, Christy parked her car, approached the door, and knocked. Taylor answered. Christy, unable to hide her happiness, embraced her. There was no apparent tension between them. Shortly after, Brian joined them to help escort both women back to Christy's car. To Christy, everything felt normal, even though the neighborhood made her uneasy. As they were heading to the car, the situation turned dire. A man suddenly appeared behind them, wielding a knife. The attack was quick and brutal. Christy was stabbed multiple times in the chest and face before she could defend herself and collapsed on the ground. Taylor screamed, hurried to call emergency services. In the recording of her call, she was heard pleading for help and explaining that her mother had been attacked. While she was on the phone with the dispatcher, Brian took the phone from her. He calmly provided their location and described what happened, stating that the attacker had fled, though his calm demeanor was unsettling given the violent situation. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Christy was alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked hard to save her. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Christy Marks was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. The main cause of death was the multiple stab wounds inflicted with great force. At the crime scene, law enforcement noticed several discrepancies. Christie's purse, which contained her belongings, cash, keys, and documents, was found untouched near where the attack occurred. This was unusual for a robbery. Additionally, a bloody knife, believed to be the weapon used, was found in nearby bushes. These discoveries raised doubts about the witnesses' accounts and hinted at potential deeper motives for the crime. The police started questioning everyone involved: Taylor, Brian, and Brian's friend, Troy Purdy II, who had been in the house during the attack. Their stories were inconsistent and contradictory. Taylor reported only seeing the silhouette of the attacker, describing someone in red sneakers and a flannel shirt. Brian claimed he tried to intervene and got injured during the struggle with the assailant, while Troy maintained he never left the house and saw nothing. Given their statements, investigators soon suspected that none of them were being truthful. Evidence from the crime scene, such as blood trails and the positioning of the weapon, indicated that the crime was staged. Authorities thought the attack was not random, it appeared to be well planned. During the first night of the investigation, detectives focused on one critical question: why was Christie targeted, and which of the people present knew the truth about what happened? Taylor Marks was born on March 29, 1989. Her biological mother chose to place her into foster care right after her birth, leaving her under the care of the adoption system. Little is known about her biological family, except that Taylor has at least one older sibling, although she was the only one placed in foster care. This marked the start of a new chapter in her life, one that, despite its difficult beginnings, eventually brought her warmth and love. A few months later, Taylor joined the Marks family. Bruce and Christy Marks, a couple who had always dreamed of having a child but were unable to conceive, felt she was destined to be part of their family the moment they first saw her. At that time, the Marks family was financially secure. Bruce worked in a senior role at a major telecommunications company, while Christy officially managed their home life and family activities. They had a large, supportive extended family that included grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who all loved, cared for Taylor. Bruce and Christy were committed to her upbringing, providing her with a high-quality education at prestigious private schools, enrolling her in dance classes, and encouraging her involvement in various extracurricular activities. As a result, Taylor had access to opportunities that many of her peers did not. Taylor had a particularly strong bond with Bruce, who was seen by family friends as her hero, always fulfilling her wishes and offering unwavering support. In contrast, her relationship with Christy was more challenging. Christy was stricter and had higher expectations. While these differing parenting styles did not create major problems during Taylor's early years, tensions began to rise as she entered her teenage years. Christy's increasing oversight and demands led to frequent conflicts between them, causing strain in their relationship. During this time, when Taylor was around 10 years old, Bruce and Christy experienced marital problems, ultimately resulting in their divorce. Taylor reported that her parents' separation had a significant emotional impact on her. She felt that Christy started directing her frustrations towards Taylor, worsening their relationship. A significant turning point in Taylor's life occurred in 2002 when she was only 13 years old. Her father, Bruce, unexpectedly passed away after falling into a diabetic coma. This loss was extremely painful for Taylor, as she not only lost her father but also her main source of emotional support. Shortly after Bruce's death, her grandfather, with whom she was very close, also passed away. These two losses deeply affected Taylor. Following Bruce's death, Christy inherited a large estate, including a considerable amount of money. She decided to use part of this inheritance to buy a new home in Akron, Ohio, hoping that a change of environment would help them start anew. However, despite this move, Taylor's emotional well-being worsened. She became more isolated, struggled academically, and had increasing conflicts with Christy. Christy wanted to support her daughter, but her approach often felt too controlling. To make up for the loss of Bruce, she tried to provide Taylor with material comforts, going out of her way to give her everything she wanted and more. Despite this, their emotional bond continued to weaken. Christy wished for Taylor to take responsibility, complete her education, and eventually continue the family legacy. However, Taylor was uninterested in these plans, instead dreaming of breaking free from what she perceived as imposed expectations. As Taylor entered her teenage years, her desire for independence conflicted with her mother's expectations, leading to increasing arguments that intensified over time. Taylor saw her mother as a constant source of pressure, and tensions rose each year. Concerned about her daughter's falling grades, Taylor's lack of focus in school, and apparent disregard for her future, Christy attempted to enforce strict rules to guide Taylor in what she believed was the right path. Taylor perceived her mother's actions as a way to control her life, which made her want to rebel even more. Christy's constant comments about Taylor's looks, clothing choices, and friends further strained their relationship. High school was especially tough for Taylor. Even with the privileges her mother provided, she started using them carelessly. Rather than concentrating on her studies, she chose to hang out with friends, ignoring Christy's efforts to keep her disciplined. Although Christy tried different approaches to guide her daughter, these attempts only pushed them further apart. In 2008, Taylor graduated from high school. A significant turning point occurred. Although Christy offered financial support and opportunities for Taylor to attend any college, Taylor was not interested in furthering her education. Christy encouraged her to at least give it a try, which led Taylor to enroll at a university in Akron. However, just a month into her first semester, she decided to drop out. This choice was devastating for Christy, highlighting the growing divide between their visions for Taylor's future. When persuasion failed, Christy opted for a more direct approach. She presented Taylor with an ultimatum: either find the job and support herself or move out of the house. This expectation aligned with American cultural norms, where young adults are urged to take responsibility for their lives as they reach adulthood. Unfortunately, Taylor interpreted her mother's words as harsh and threatening, escalating the conflict between them. The situation worsened in May 2009 when Taylor met Brian Smith, a 21-year-old known for his rebellious nature. Brian lived with his mother and sister in a low-income neighborhood. Taylor was attracted to him, viewing him as a way to break free from her mother's control. People who knew Brian warned that he had a bad temper and needed to dominate his relationships, but Taylor had no change of mind. Christy disapproved of the relationship, worried about Brian's behavior and its potential impact on her daughter. She tried to stop Taylor from seeing him and even forbade him from visiting their home, but this only made Taylor more determined to pursue the relationship. Soon after, Taylor moved in with Brian, leaving her mother's house behind. However, life with Brian was not as she had hoped. Initially, their relationship appeared promising, but it quickly became evident that Brian was controlling and aggressive. Taylor dealt with jealousy, control, and frequent bursts of anger from him. Even so, she refused to return home, seeing it as a sign of weakness. Concerned for Taylor's well-being, Christy continued to support her by providing essential items and staying in touch, hoping that Taylor would come to realize her mistakes. The tension between Christy and Taylor reached a peak when Christy offered Taylor a chance to return home. She could come back if she either continued her education or found a job. To help her, Christy also offered to provide a car, an apartment, and a job at her company. However, Taylor showed little interest in these options. Despite the challenges, her tumultuous relationship with Brian continued. Christy hoped that, in time, Taylor would realize her mistakes and return home to take on more responsibilities. Sadly, this hope would never materialize. As the years passed, the rift in their relationship widened, leading to a tragic outcome. When Taylor moved in with Brian, she thought she was gaining the freedom she had long desired. However, this freedom quickly turned into a series of restrictions. Life with Brian was very different from what she had expected. He enforced strict rules and scrutinized every aspect of her life. Taylor, who was used to a certain degree of comfort and independence, found herself in a situation where she had to obey Brian's demands. Brian's control over Taylor grew increasingly extreme. He frequently checked her phone, read her text messages, and closely monitored where she went. Even her conversations with Christy became a source of conflict. Brian persuaded Taylor that her mother was trying to manipulate her and limit her independence. His influence intensified the rift between Taylor and Christy, who kept trying to stay in touch and maintain their communication. In Brian's home, Taylor felt completely isolated. He not only limited her social interactions but also manipulated her emotions, making her believe he was the only one who truly understood her. During arguments, Brian exhibited aggressive behavior, breaking things and making threats. After these outbursts, he demanded her total loyalty and constantly reminded her of how much she depended on him. The situation was made worse by Brian's family. His mother, Tammy, chose not to intervene, effectively supporting Brian's behavior. His younger sister also contributed to controlling Taylor by watching her closely when Brian was not around, creating an environment where Taylor's every action was monitored. Taylor's financial ties to her mother were another significant issue in her relationship with Brian. Knowing about Christy's wealth and Taylor's potential inheritance, Brian was determined to keep control over her. He often blamed her mother for her problems, driving a wedge between them. Under Brian's influence, Taylor started avoiding her mother. Even when Christy came to help her daughter, Brian stayed distant and dismissive, discouraging Taylor from accepting her mother's support, insisting they could manage on their own. Despite Brian's efforts, Christy continued to care for Taylor, providing her with necessities and encouraging her to return home. By the summer of 2009, the tension between Taylor, Brian, and Christy had intensified. After months of living with Brian, Taylor had become completely reliant on him. As Brian's control grew and his aggression escalated, a new plan emerged, something that initially felt unlikely but quickly became more tangible. This idea was driven by increasing pressure, shared dissatisfaction, and financial motivations. The plan was to eliminate Christy permanently, which would give them access to her assets. For Taylor, this was a way to cut her last connections to her mother and achieve financial independence. For Brian, it was a chance to secure his control over Taylor and use her inheritance to improve his own situation. The idea of committing a crime started to spread among their close friends. Brian's 19-year-old friend, Troy Purdy, who often visited their home, joined these discussions. Being younger and impressionable, Troy was seen as the perfect choice for the plan. What began as jokes or hypothetical situations eventually grew more serious. The planning took place gradually, with careful attention to detail. Brian and Taylor discussed how to make the crime appear as if it were a robbery or a random attack. They decided that any evidence left at the scene should suggest spontaneous violence rather than a planned crime. Troy was selected to carry out the act to keep Brian and Taylor from being directly linked to it. Troy agreed to participate because of his loyalty to Brian and didn't question the plan when asked. In return for his involvement, Troy was promised $5,000, which Taylor expected to come from her inheritance once the legal matters were settled. They paid special attention to choosing a weapon. Taylor mentioned that Brian's mother, Tammy, even bought a knife for the plan, but it was later rejected due to its size and weight. Eventually, Troy was tasked with finding a suitable weapon. He chose a lightweight knife that was easy to hide and carry. A crucial part of their preparation was observing Christy's habits. They knew Christy frequently visited Brian's house to see Taylor, making her an easy target since she usually came alone under the pretense of picking up her daughter. This detail was included in their plan. They envisioned Christy arriving at the house, and the attack happening as she was leaving or near her car. Just before the plan was implemented, Taylor took a crucial step to ensure everything would go smoothly. She called her mother and asked for a ride home, implying she wanted to return. This call was intended to put Christy at ease, making her less suspicious about Taylor's true intentions. Throughout their discussions, Taylor appeared confident and committed. According to Troy, she was not just involved in planning but was also determined to follow through. Although her relationship with her mother was strained, taking such a significant action was a big deal. Taylor explained her involvement by referring to years of resentment and a strong desire to break free from her mother's control. Meanwhile, Brian kept the process on track, persuading Taylor that this was the only way to solve her issues. By the evening of October 24, 2009, everything was in place. Taylor was aware that the plan was shifting from theory to action. Taylor remained calm and focused, convinced this was the best way forward for them. For Taylor and Brian, it represented the start of a new chapter in their lives. That day began as an ordinary day for Christy Marks but ended in tragedy. That evening, Taylor called her mother to say she wanted to come home. For Christy, this unexpected phone call brought joy after months of tension. She viewed it as a chance to reconnect with her daughter. Christy quickly packed her things, got in her car, and drove to Brian's house, unaware that she was heading into a carefully orchestrated crime. Christy arrived at around 7 p.m. and parked her car near the house. She walked to the front door, where Taylor welcomed her with a smile and a hug, signaling a potential reconciliation. Brian watched from a distance as they interacted, while Troy stayed inside to avoid raising any suspicion. As Christy and Taylor walked toward the car, with Brian following closely behind, everything seemed normal. However, everything changed when they reached the car. Troy suddenly emerged from the house with a knife and attacked Christy. She had no time to react as Troy stabbed her multiple times in the chest and face. The assault was quick and brutal, leaving Christy unable to defend herself. She collapsed to the ground with over 10 stab wounds. This was not a robbery, it was a targeted attack intended to kill her. Taylor stood nearby, observing the attack unfold. Later, she claimed she didn't intervene because she was scared of Troy, but surveillance footage revealed that she showed no signs of panic or distress. Brian also did not intervene, insisting that his role was to protect the women, yet he took no action to stop Troy. After the attack, Taylor called emergency services, her voice tense as she urgently requested an ambulance. Brian then took over the call, acting as the coordinator. He calmly provided the dispatcher with details about their location and the type of assistance required. His unemotional tone raised suspicions among law enforcement officials who later listened to the call. Troy, the attacker, discarded the knife in a nearby bush and fled the scene. He later claimed that he had acted out of emotional distress, but evidence suggested his actions were premeditated. Following Christy Marks's tragic death, the investigation started right away. Police arrived at the scene within minutes of the emergency call. They found evidence that raised immediate doubts: a knife hidden in the bushes, Christie's purse untouched with all her belongings, and no signs of robbery. These details did not support the theory of a random attack. Investigators began by interviewing the main individuals involved: Taylor, Brian, and Troy. They were interviewed separately to avoid any possibility of collaboration. However, their stories did not match and raised suspicions as the police noticed inconsistencies in their statements. The crucial evidence was obtained from surveillance footage near the crime scene. The video showed Taylor and Brian standing close by while Troy attacked Christy. Neither of them attempted to stop the assault. This footage became a pivotal element in the investigation. With this evidence, detectives brought the suspects back for additional questioning. Under the strain of the evidence presented, Troy was the first to confess. He stated that the attack was planned in advance, claimed that Taylor had orchestrated the scheme. Troy explained that she had approached him and Brian with the plan, assuring them of a financial reward from her expected inheritance after her mother's death. Troy admitted that his role was to carry out the attack while Brian was tasked with creating an alibi by making it look like a robbery. He also confessed to intentionally injuring Brian to strengthen the staged scenario's credibility. His admission completely contradicted Taylor's earlier assertion that the attack was random. When Brian heard about Troy's confession, he changed his story as well. He supported Troy's claim that Taylor had come up with the plan but denied being actively involved. Brian stated that while he didn't agree with the attack, he felt he couldn't stop Taylor and Troy. He also claimed he didn't know the full details of the plan until the last moment, which appeared to minimize his involvement. Faced with growing evidence and accusations, Taylor initially denied her participation. However, her account became more inconsistent over time. Investigators observed that she started contradicting herself, and her behavior indicated she was trying to conceal the truth. Eventually, under the pressure of the evidence, Taylor admitted to discussing the plan with Brian and Troy. The investigation revealed that the crime was carefully planned, with every detail considered, from selecting the weapon to staging fake injuries. The financial motive mentioned by both Troy and Brian became a key focus for the prosecution. Taylor confessed that her ongoing conflict with her mother influenced her decision, but she maintained that she didn't expect the situation to end in tragedy. The police quickly understood what had occurred. Taylor Marks, Brian Smith, and Troy Purdy were arrested and charged in connection with Christy Marks's death. While this marked the end of the initial investigation phase, the legal proceedings were just beginning. The court would assess their levels of responsibility and determine their sentences. The trial for Christy Marks's case started in late 2009. The defendants faced intense public attention due to the violent nature of the crime and their connections to the victim. The prosecution presented a strong case supported by extensive evidence, witness testimonies, and video recordings. A key piece of evidence was the surveillance footage showing Taylor and Brian standing by without attempting to intervene during the attack on Christy. Moreover, Troy's confession, which detailed the conspiracy and his involvement in the crime, played a crucial role in the case. Investigators shared text messages from Taylor's phone where she discussed her troubled relationship with her mother and her wish to be independent. They also uncovered evidence of a financial motive, noting that Taylor was set to inherit a significant sum after Christie's death. Christie possessed considerable assets, including real estate, a business, and savings. Defense attorneys for Taylor, Brian, and Troy tried to argue that their clients were not fully responsible for the crime. Taylor's lawyer insisted that she was heavily influenced by Brian and lacked the ability to act on her own. He attributed her vulnerability to the emotional turmoil following her father's death and the pressure from her mother. Brian claimed he had no direct role in the crime, with his lawyer stating he was shocked and unaware of the plan until it unfolded, preventing him from intervening. Meanwhile, Troy, who initially confessed, tried to alter his story during the trial, asserting that he acted under Brian's coercion. During the proceedings, Troy accepted a plea deal to admit his guilt and testify against the others, resulting in a life sentence without parole, which spared him from the death penalty. Realizing her situation was dire, Taylor also pleaded guilty during the hearings. She gave a heartfelt statement where she expressed regret for her actions, explaining that her conflicts with her mother and the influence of Brian led her to take part in the crime. However, the prosecutors insisted that her involvement was intentional and well-planned. Brian, on the other hand, initially claimed he was not guilty but later acknowledged his role when presented with undeniable evidence. He argued that his participation was minor and that he never meant for the crime to happen, but the court saw this as an effort to minimize his accountability. In 2010, the court issued its verdicts. Taylor Marks and Brian Smith were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy, resulting in life sentences without the possibility of parole. Although Taylor expressed remorse, her statement about losing control was viewed as an attempt to reduce her sentence. Troy, under the terms of his plea deal, also received a life sentence. However, his subsequent behavior in prison became concerning when he was charged in 2015 for possessing a weapon, which raised concerns about his ability to rehabilitate. The sentencing had a profound impact on everyone involved in the tragedy. This situation serves as a stark reminder of how personal conflicts and impulsive choices can ruin even the strongest bonds. Taylor then was relocated to a women's correctional facility in Ohio. Throughout her early years in prison, she remained isolated, choosing to avoid interaction with the media and other inmates. In 2021, Taylor participated in a television interview regarding her case. During the interview, she acknowledged that her actions were serious but continued to justify them by discussing her conflicts with her mother and her emotional struggles. Although she had previously expressed remorse in court, Taylor reiterated her criticisms of her mother, calling her strict and unsupportive after her father's death. She also expressed a desire for her case to be reviewed, hoping for a chance at freedom. These statements caused controversy, with many perceiving them as indications of insincerity. Currently, Taylor spends her time involved in rehabilitation programs and working within the prison. Some view her as manipulative and insincere, while others believe she is seeking meaning in her life while incarcerated. Meanwhile, Brian, who is also serving a life sentence in a high-security prison, has kept a low profile since his conviction. He has avoided media interviews and has not publicly addressed his involvement in the crime. Prison staff describe Brian as a difficult inmate who often engages in conflicts and displays aggression. His name came up again in 2017 when reports revealed he had gotten into a fight with another inmate. This incident highlighted that his aggressive behavior had not improved since his sentencing. Like Taylor, Brian symbolizes the tragic inability to accept responsibility and the harmful impact one person can have on others. Troy, who played a direct role in the crime, was also sent to a maximum security prison. Even though he received a plea deal, his conduct in prison showed he hadn't changed. Since the incident, Troy has seldom been covered in the media. While some viewed his involvement in the crime as a result of being manipulated by Brian and Taylor, his readiness to carry out the fatal attacks raised concerns about his potential for rehabilitation. The memory of Christy Marks endures among her friends and surviving family. Her senior care business was sold after her death, with part of the proceeds going to charities that support victims of domestic violence. Christy is often remembered by her loved ones as a strong and compassionate woman who devoted her life to helping others. Years after Christy's passing, Her story remains a warning about the need for open communication in families and the value of seeking professional help when conflicts escalate. Love can indeed be blind, but sometimes it borders on insanity. In some instances, it is so blind that it prevents one from recognizing the cruelty directed at loved ones. This can lead to truly horrific outcomes. Maya Chappell was born in March 2020. Her mother was Dana Carr, and her father was James Chappell. Dana herself came from a dysfunctional family, where both of her parents struggled with alcohol abuse. Her father was cruel, often beat both his wife and daughter. All of this left a serious mark on Dana's soul. She ran away from her family as soon as she could provide for herself. This decision likely came just in time. Dana's father was convicted of murder. He ended up in prison, while his 17-year-old daughter was in a relationship with James Chappell, who was already 21. Many believe that Dana was too immature for a serious relationship, marriage, and especially motherhood, but she desperately needed love. Additionally, having a boyfriend was an opportunity for her to escape her dangerous family. They got married and were preparing for the birth of their child. Unfortunately, the relationship with James did not allow the young mother to attain what she wanted. Soon after Maya was born, Dana broke up with James in early summer 2022 because she had begun dating Michael Damon. Their relationship developed rapidly, and by the end of August 2022, they had moved in together. Despite James's efforts to distance himself from Dana, Maya stayed with her mother. The new boyfriend was unemployed, and Dana worked almost 7 days a week to support the entire family. Money was tight, so they saved on everything, including childcare and kindergarten. When Dana went to work, she left her daughter with her boyfriend. The girl's father rarely saw his daughter due to the restrictions imposed by Dana. All of this occurred in the small town of Shotton Colliery, UK. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally, and nothing foreshadowed trouble until one day. On September 28, 2022, around 10 a.m., Michael's stepfather stopped by their house. By this time, Dana and Michael had been living together for a month. According to Dana, everything was fine. However, when he arrived, Maya was acting very restlessly, as if she were afraid of Michael. When asked about his suspicious behavior, Michael explained that he had had a dispute over the phone with several banks that were supposed to give him a loan but refused. Things were not going well for him. He tried to solve his financial problems, managed to convince his stepfather that everything was fine and that there was no need to worry. After his stepfather left, Michael began trying to apply for benefits, contacted several more banks and organizations to secure a loan. However, they also denied him due to his lack of employment and income. Later, Michael called Dana, claimed that her daughter had lost consciousness and was having difficulty breathing. Following this call, Michael contacted the UK emergency services to 999. When paramedics and police arrived at the house, they found Maya in critical condition. She was taken to the Great North Children's Hospital, where she remained unconscious as doctors desperately fought to save her life for the next 2 days. Unfortunately, Maya died in the hospital. An autopsy was performed, revealing multiple injuries to Maya's brain, including severe trauma consistent with violent shaking. Medical experts determined that Michael Damon had likely shaken Maya forcefully, contributing to the fatal brain injuries. 5 witnesses stated that these injuries could have resulted from child abuse. The doctors who treated Maya were shocked by the extent of her injuries. She had extensive bruising all over her body, but it was impossible to determine the exact sequence of events leading to her condition. Even in her intimate areas, a large bruise and marks in various stages of healing were found, although there were no signs of sexual assault. Based on the condition of the bruises, it appeared that most of the injuries had been inflicted on September 28. Dana and Michael were questioned separately. Both denied any abuse towards Maya, offered several explanations. They stated that Maya was very energetic, frequently running and falling, which they said was why she had so many bruises. However, doctors disagreed with their claims, stating that it was impossible for the child to have gotten into such a condition on her own. Detectives began investigating the circumstances related to Maya's death. Family members of Michael and Dana reported that Maya had started developing bruises shortly after they began living together. The first bruises were discovered on August 26th. On that day, neighbors saw Maya while walking with their children, and it was apparent that she had marks on her head, which she was trying to hide with her hair. The following day, they met with relatives, including Michael's family, who also noticed that Maya was hurt. Dana and Michael explained that Maya had fallen from a slide, and Dana supported this explanation. Although they managed to calm everyone down, it was difficult to believe their story, especially since the bruise was not only on Maya's head but also inside her left ear. It's hard to imagine how such an injury could occur accidentally. Additionally, there were small bruises around her jaw that looked like they were caused by fingers. On September 5th, Michael called his girlfriend at work to inform her that Maya was having trouble breathing. When Dana requested time off to come home, everything appeared to be fine, but new marks had appeared on Maya's body. Michael quickly brushed them off as injuries from accidental falls in the yard where they had been playing while their mother worked. The next day, when Dana took Maya out again, several acquaintances pointed out a noticeable cut on her nose. A few days later, Maya had a split lip. Each time, the explanations were similar: she was running, fell, and got hurt. Maya was briefly entrusted to Dana's mother so her grandmother could spend time with her. That evening, while bathing Maya, her grandmother noticed bruises all over her body. She took a photo of the bruises and sent it to Dana, who then advised her to take Maya to the hospital. Following this advice, she went to the hospital. When the doctor inquired about the bruises, she shared the usual explanation that Maya was clumsy and very active, often bumping into things both indoors and outdoors. The doctor accepted her explanation, and no one reported the situation to the authorities. On September 14th, Maya visited a kindergarten near their home for the first time. The purpose of this visit was to help her adjust to the new environment. Maya enjoyed her time there, but unfortunately, she never returned. Dana, her caregiver, encountered questions from the staff about the marks on Maya's body, which led her to stop bringing Maya to the kindergarten. The teachers even tried to convince Dana to let Maya return, but she declined, saying that Maya either didn't want to go or was unwell. On September 15th, Maya was scheduled to be given to her biological father, James. However, Dana refused to comply, claiming that Maya was sick. Instead, she left the girl with her mother and stepfather. Dana's mother took Maya to a relative who was a trained nurse. That day, they noticed a large, unusual bruise on Maya's buttocks. It had been concealed by her diaper, but once it was removed, the bruise was clearly visible. They asked Dana for an explanation, and she pointed to Michael, who claimed that Maya had bitten herself. This explanation seemed unlikely, so they decided to take some photos to document the odd injury. During a phone conversation with Dana, Michael repeatedly insisted that he was not at fault, even though no one had accused him of anything. Their behavior raised further suspicion. The following weekend, Maya visited her relatives and was observed with new injuries, including 4 bruises on her chest. What stood out most was the calm attitude of her mother, who insisted that the injuries were merely accidents. On September 27th, Maya had gotten another bruise while they were playing outside. Despite these concerning incidents, Dana remained unbothered and continued to go to work each day, leaving Maya alone with Michael. It later emerged that Dana had repeatedly lied to Maya's father, stepfather, mother, kindergarten teachers Maya's health. This deception was aimed at hiding the true person responsible for the bruises, whom detectives believed was Michael. After Maya died, Dana was the first to be questioned and consistently provided false information. To justify her lies, she created a story claiming she was pregnant during Maya's abuse and suffered a miscarriage due to stress when Maya died, which she described as emotional shock. This made it difficult to extract useful information from her. Meanwhile, Michael exhibited immature behavior. He initially blamed Dana's mother for abuse, then his stepfather, and ultimately Maya's biological father. However, detectives were convinced that the ongoing abuse of Maya was linked to him, as her bruises appeared specifically when she was left alone with Michael. The reason for the abuse was quickly understood. Michael was venting his frustration on Maya. This frustration stemmed from his financial troubles and the threats he faced for failing to pay his debts. On September 28th, Michael had a particularly difficult day when banned substance dealers confronted him, claiming he owed them a large sum of money. These issues had been mounting for several months. They had been persistently pressing him for repayment. Although he was being followed, he had not yet suffered any physical harm. He managed to assure them once again that he would pay them soon. However, he actually did not have the necessary funds and was desperately trying to find a solution. Michael reached out to social services for assistance, but received no help. He then tried contacting banks, but to no avail. This continuous stream of bad news drove him to a breaking point, and he directed his anger towards the little girl. The incident deeply affected Maya's biological father, James. For the past 2 years, he believed he was trying to protect his daughter from her mother, Dana, whom he saw as unfit to care for his daughter. When Dana filed for divorce, she accused James of being aggressive and cruel, claiming their relationship was toxic. James was concerned that Dana might seek revenge, which could harm Maya. Although Dana could not prove her claims about her ex-husband's aggressive behavior, she was awarded primary custody of their daughter. James was only allowed to visit his daughter on weekends. Initially, Dana tried to restrict communication between James and their child, despite his legal visitation rights. She often found ways to prevent their interactions, avoid bringing their daughter to him. Consequently, James had very limited time with Maya. When he noticed bruises on Maya, he asked Dana about them, but she repeatedly made excuses about accidents. Eventually, she began to limit his visits with Maya even more to evade his questions. James believed that if Dana was not directly involved in the abuse of Maya, she at least supported her boyfriend, who probably was involved. From the start, James suspected something was off about Michael, but Dana presented Maya's relationship with Michael as nearly perfect. She claimed that Michael treated Maya like his own daughter, that they spent all their free time together, going for walks, watching movies, and playing games. When James first noticed bruises on Maya, he immediately checked Michael's name in police databases, suspecting he might have a criminal history. To his surprise, Michael had no record. Despite Dana's reassurances, James witnessed changes in Maya's behavior during their brief visits. She had become disobedient, extremely anxious, cried often, and struggled to sleep. He associated these changes with the negative influence of Dana and Michael, but he lacked concrete evidence. One day, when James went to pick up his daughter from the home she shared with Dana and Michael, he found broken windows. Both claimed that some troublemakers were responsible for the situation, but it soon became clear that the damage was caused by dealers trying to intimidate Michael. On James's next visit, he saw that the house had been vandalized with paint. When James suspected his daughter was being abused, he wanted to collect evidence to formally report the situation. Unfortunately, during this time, Dana severely restricted his communication with Maya. She frequently canceled planned visits, claiming to be sick or saying Maya didn't want to see her father. This left James powerless to protect Maya. It soon became clear that these actions were intentional, aimed at allowing Maya's bruises to heal and preventing any inquiries about them. When Maya finally got to visit her father, Dana continued to make excuses for the new injuries, stating that Maya had been with her grandparents for several days, thus shifting the blame onto them for not watching the girl properly. Unfortunately, James faced challenges when trying to communicate with Maya because of her young age. He wanted to talk about her bruises, but every time he brought it up, she seemed to gesture as if something were breaking and simply said, "D." It wasn't until later that James understood she was referring to Michael by a nickname derived from his last name, Damon. Unfortunately, this information came too late to charge him with abusing the little girl. During the investigation, a lot of relevant information emerged from examining Michael's emails and phone records. It became clear that Dana was unaware of the serious situation and believed Michael's false narratives. He often claimed that Maya had fallen while playing on the playground or bumped into something at home. However, such incidents had never occurred in Maya's life before meeting him. These sudden changes in her behavior didn't raise any alarms for her biological mother, who continued to trust what she was told. The detectives questioned why Dana, considering the strange injuries and her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, had not reached out to a medical center, the police, or other professionals. Dana explained that her lack of action was due to her inexperience. When family members began to ask uncomfortable questions about Maya's injuries, Michael responded by saying that if they didn't stop prying into their affairs, he would no longer babysit Maya. Meanwhile, Dana tried to reassure her boyfriend, claiming that she believed him and rationalizing his actions to protect their relationship. Rather than confronting her doubts about Michael, she continued to defend him. The conversation concluded with Dana expressing her love for him, stating that she trusted him and wanted him to keep babysitting her daughter. Despite being shown pictures of her injured daughter, Dana claimed that without her boyfriend's supervision, Maya would have suffered even more. James was taken aback by his ex-wife's apparent ignorance, but he felt powerless to change the situation. Throughout their relationship, Michael repeatedly assured Dana that he would never harm her daughter, and she never think ill of him. On the day of the incident, when Michael messaged Dana that Maya was choking, Dana concluded their brief exchange by expressing her love for him and her desire not to lose him, showing little concern for her daughter's well-being. When the child was discovered alive at home, there were immediate and serious suspicions of domestic violence. At the medical center, doctors found numerous bruises on Maya's body in various stages of healing, including what looked suspiciously like bite marks. The autopsy revealed that the child had endured repeated beatings with a blunt object, likely inflicted by an adult's fists. Most of the injuries were concentrated around her head and abdomen, suggesting she may have been violently thrown to the floor. The surgeon who attempted to save Maya noted that her injuries resembled those from a fall from a significant height or a high-speed car crash. Only after hearing these alarming assessments did Dana begin to have suspicions. However, detectives believed Dana was feigning ignorance, as Maya's injuries were the result of consistent abuse from Michael, a situation she likely was aware of. Others around her had been discussing the matter and urging her to recognize the reality of the situation. Michael was interrogated but did not confess to any wrongdoing. After Maya died at the medical center, Michael Damon was charged with murder. During a second interrogation, where he was the main suspect, he continued to deny any guilt. He portrayed his relationship with Maya as loving and claimed he never yelled or swore at her. Michael said he noticed Maya was unwell on the day she stopped breathing. They had been playing Xbox together, and then she went to her bedroom while he continued to play. About 10 minutes later, he heard a loud thud from her room. Upon entering, he found Maya lying motionless on the floor. It looked like she had fallen out of bed twice. He immediately noticed Maya's irregular breathing and called Dana at home, then contacted emergency services. This explanation seemed unconvincing. The detectives interviewed a young man who had visited their home earlier that morning. He was disturbed by Maya's behavior and initially wanted to take her with him. He described her as crying, calling for her mother, looking frightened, and even trying to hide when she saw Michael, indicating she felt uncomfortable around him. When Michael spoke to the young man about the situation, Michael assured him that everything was fine and that there was nothing to worry about. Nevertheless, the young man managed to record a video that showed Maya's unusual behavior, which was later presented in court to contradict Michael's statements. The detectives uncovered numerous calls related to Michael's financial issues and were alarmed by their timing. Michael had temporarily left Maya alone to request loan on his mobile phone, showing a complete disregard for her well-being. Investigators also discovered that Michael was unfaithful to his girlfriend, Dana, as he had a profile on an online dating site and date other women while in a relationship with her. Additionally, Michael was taking steroids along with other prohibited substances, which likely exacerbated his aggressive behavior and emotional instability, leading him to lose control at times. This situation caused trouble for Maya. Dana was ultimately arrested, charged with cruelty toward her daughter for her indifference to the domestic abuse, and chose to stand by Michael instead of leaving him. In October 2023, the trial began. During the trial, Dana expressed that she had been so infatuated with her boyfriend that it blinded her to the reality of the situation. She failed to recognize the harm Michael was causing her daughter and did not believe her loved ones when they tried to warn her. Dana said she didn't fully grasp the consequences of Michael's actions. Many suspected that she was merely trying to avoid prison. During the hearing, the defense attorney attempted to present Dana as a victim of long-term familial abuse, particularly from her father. He highlighted that she had experienced violence throughout her childhood. Ultimately, the attorney's arguments might have evoked some sympathy from the jury, but they did not excuse her lack of concern for Maya. During the trial, Dana expressed discomfort at being in the same room with Michael. She contradicted her previous statements with another falsehood. Initially, she claimed to have suffered a miscarriage after Maya's death. Now, she escalated her claims, stating that she had been pregnant with twins fathered by Michael and that their fate also ended tragically. Dana asserted that she had an abortion upon realizing Michael had killed her daughter and wanted nothing to do with him or his children. This claim was swiftly debunked by prosecutors, who noted the absence of any medical documentation to support her allegations of pregnancy, miscarriage, or abortion. End of trial. Maya's mother, Dana Carr, 24, was convicted of leaving the child to die and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Subsequently, Michael Damon's trial began. Unlike Dana, he chose not to testify in his defense. His lawyer argued that Michael lacked sadistic intent, premeditation, or planning regarding Maya's death, claiming it was an accident. Despite these weak justifications, Michael was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, the court allowed for the possibility of parole after 20 years. Maya's funeral was held on November 4, 2022. Following this heartbreaking event, James posted a final message for his daughter on social media. In it, he said goodbye, expressed his sorrow for not being able to protect her, and promised that they would be reunited one day. Heloisa Maria de Alencastro Souza was born in 2008 in Cuiabá, Central West Brazil. She lived peacefully with her mother, Suelen de Alencastro, and her grandmother. The family led a simple life, blending in with their community. Heloisa attended Adventist College in Centro Politico Administration, where she was a dedicated student. She was quiet in class, always completing her assignments and staying out of trouble. Heloisa didn't have many close friendships, but she did have one trusted friend with whom she shared personal thoughts. This friend later suggested that Heloisa displayed some traits of level 1 autism, although she was never officially diagnosed. Signs included her reserved nature, avoidance of eye contact, and anxiety in social situations. Despite this, Heloisa was warm and friendly with those she trusted. She had a deep passion for animals, aspired to become a veterinarian. She took her dreams seriously, researching veterinary programs from a young age. Her grandmother noted that she was responsible, helpful around the house, capable of cooking, cleaning, and caring for the family pet without needing constant supervision. She was an ordinary teenager focused on her future and goals, living a life that was steady, unassuming. Benedito Anunciaco de Santana was born in 1984 into a modest family and was the younger of 2 brothers. His older brother later became involved in a legal case related to a violent crime against his former partner. Their father was a laborer, while their mother stayed at home. The family lived in a suburb of Cuiabá. Neighbors noted that both boys were quiet from an early age and did not have a close relationship with their parents. As a teenager, Benedito began attending a local Catholic church and eventually started helping out during services. After finishing school, Benedito obtained an entry-level job at a local government agency. Through personal connections and a reputation for hard work, he gradually advanced in his career. At the time of these events, Benedito was the head of the Transportation Division at the Secretariat of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Mato Grosso. He earned a stable income, had access to a work vehicle, and was regarded as someone with a respectable social standing. In his daily life, Benedito often attended local events, expressed concerns about neighborhood problems, and suggested new initiatives. He stayed active in his church. On social media, he consistently shared religious posts, inspirational quotes, photos from events, and images of places of worship. Many of his pictures featured his son, Gustavo Benedito Jr. Lara de Santana, or were taken at churches and community celebrations. His online presence reflected the image of a stable, respectable man with strong faith. Not much is known about Benedito's personal life before he met Sue Ellen. At the start of their relationship, he was not married and was not living with his son's mother. There are no official records of his past relationships. His behavior suggests that he deliberately kept details of his personal history private, only sharing information that supported his public persona. Sue Ellen was employed at a government agency in Cuiaba, where she met Benedito. At first, he appeared confident, friendly. In the workplace, he was known as a dependable and dedicated employee. He was always polite, calm, and eager to assist his colleagues. This positive impression significantly influenced Sue Ellen's choice to let him become part of her life. Their relationship reportedly started about 4 months before the incidents in question. The investigators found evidence that Benedito had full access to her home, often used her keys. This indicates that their relationship might have been more serious, long-lasting than it seemed at first. Benedito quickly became a regular part of Sue Ellen's home life. He started visiting unexpectedly, moved around the house confidently, and appeared to integrate himself into their daily routines. To outsiders, it seemed he genuinely cared and was making an effort to be involved with the family. He was calm, rarely raised his voice, and had a knack for making others feel comfortable. Benedito was older, had a stable job, projected an image of responsibility, maturity. Sue Ellen did not seem to notice anything alarming. She saw him as a source of support. Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense. Heloisa's grandmother, who lived with them, felt uneasy about Benedito's frequent visits. It wasn't that she disliked him, rather, she found his overly polite and gentle demeanor insincere. Heloisa herself felt uncomfortable during their first interactions. Although she didn't confront him or create conflict, she made a point to avoid engaging with him. She confided in a close friend, expressing that Benedito made her uneasy, even though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. She was troubled by his gaze, his speech, and particularly the way he posed in photos. What concerned her the most were his social media posts, where he used hand gestures that reminded her of criminal symbols. She told her friend frankly that he appeared to have a shady background. Despite this, she chose not to share her concerns with her mother, possibly fearing she would be misunderstood. Heloisa's friend noted that Sue Ellen seemed either unaware of Heloisa's change in behavior or didn't consider it important. No one in the household questioned Benedito's past, his acquaintances, or his previous relationships. His behavior never raised any alarms. A seemingly decent person had gained Sue Ellen's trust without arousing suspicion. On Tuesday, April 22, 2025, at around 3 p.m., it was a typical weekday in Cuiaba. Sue Ellen and her mother were at work, leaving Heloisa home alone. She wasn't expecting any visitors. Everything seemed calm. At that time, Benedito arrived at Sue Ellen's house in a government-issued Fiat Toro, which he used for his job at the Secretariat of Science and Technology. He had 3 teenagers with him, his son Gustavo and 2 others, aged 16 and 17. They had been instructed earlier and stayed hidden in the vehicle to avoid attracting attention from neighbors or security cameras. Their plan was to wait until there were no adults in the house. Benedito parked the car in the garage and entered the house alone. Surveillance footage showed that he was inside for about 15 minutes. He then returned to the car and left. The cameras did not capture anything unusual. He seemed calm. Neighbors did not report hearing any noise or seeing any signs of trouble. However, during that brief time, Benedito had let the 3 teenagers into the house. One of the confessions revealed that the group waited until Benedito left the property before executing their plan. Heloisa was inside the house alone when she saw strangers and became terrified. In her panic, she tried to escape to another room, but one of the intruders caught her. She was in shock, unable to scream or fight back. They tied her legs. Tragically, her life was taken in a room using a USB cable. At the time of the crime, Benedito was not in the house. He had reportedly left to take a work-related call. However, testimonies indicated he was aware of what was happening. Heloisa lost consciousness on the floor due to difficulty breathing. One of the attackers checked for her pulse and breathing but reported she was unresponsive. They then used ropes and bed sheets to move her body, wrapping it up, dragging it into another room to hide it temporarily. They ransacked the house to make it look like a burglary. Their next plan was to attack on Suellen. By 6 p.m., Suellen came home with a female relative who was holding an infant. Security cameras captured their arrival. Everything seemed normal outside, but inside, the assailants were preparing to strike. Although the lights were off, the air conditioning was running, raising Suellen's suspicions. She called out for Heloisa but received no answer. As they entered the house, the three teenagers attacked Suellen, overpowering her, hitting her, tying her up, and dragging her further inside. The woman with the infant was not harmed. She was instructed to sit quietly against the wall with the baby, not to interfere, while the attackers showed no aggression towards them. Suellen was initially confused about the situation. She had been tied up, physically harmed, and locked away in one of the rooms. She thought a robbery was happening, suspected that her daughter might be tied up somewhere else in the house. The intruders did not provide any explanations, nor did they show their faces or give their names. However, at one point, Suellen recognized one of the voices as belonging to Gustavo, Benedito's son. This realization made her understand that the attack was not random. While keeping Suellen isolated, the intruders began to steal valuables from the house. They quickly loaded a TV, electronics, important documents, and the sheet covering Heloisa's body into Hyundai HB20. They used Suellen's own car to transport the stolen items. Once they finished loading everything, the group left the house. Neither neighbors nor passers-by noticed anything out of the ordinary. Suellen remained inside, still tied up and injured, unaware of the full extent of what had occurred. She believed that Heloisa had been taken away from her. No one had informed her of the truth. The crime was disguised as a robbery with an abduction. The scene was chaotic. Cabinets were forced open, the lights were off, and there was a mess everywhere. It resembled a typical break-in, but it had actually been meticulously planned. The perpetrators wanted it to look like a regular home invasion. Suellen had no idea that the worst had already happened. Soon after the others left, Benedito returned to the house. He didn't go in immediately. Instead, he waited outside until he was certain everything was finished. Once inside, he found Suellen bound and visibly shaken. She told him that a group of young men had broken in, attacked her, stolen items, and taken Heloisa with them. Benedito's reaction was exaggerated. He pretended to be surprised, anxious. He was merely acting as if it were the first time he heard the news. Benedito was the one who suggested taking Suellen to the nearest urgent care clinic. He posted on social media with a photo of Heloisa, making an emotional appeal for assistance, stating that she was missing and he needed everyone's support. His actions were carefully planned to portray him as a distressed, worried stepfather seeking help. When they arrived at the hospital, Suellen was brought in a wheelchair. Surveillance footage showed Benedito assisting her into the building, talking to medical staff, and staying close to her. He appeared to want to be seen, made no effort to avoid the cameras. Authorities quickly launched an investigation after receiving a report of an assault and possible abduction. While Suellen was receiving medical treatment, police took her statement, began collecting evidence. The first action was to track her vehicle, a Hyundai HB20 registered to Suellen. Surveillance systems monitored the car's route, capturing it traveling along Dubai Avenue and then toward the area between Ribeiro du Lipa and the highway leading to Gorija. In that area, investigators found a white bundle made of bed sheets and evidence indicating the vehicle had stopped there. They also discovered an old concrete well in Ribeiro du Lipa, which is where the body had been hidden. The fire department was called to safely recover the remains. Forensic experts found that the lower legs had been bound, and there were marks around the neck suggesting restricted breathing. There were no clear signs of a physical struggle. A broken leg occurred, possibly from falling down the well. At this point, investigators started to focus on individuals close to the family. While reviewing surveillance footage, they noted Benedito's unusual behavior and his attempts to portray himself as a victim. Meanwhile, investigators began gathering information about Benedito's son, Gustavo. The first arrest happened quickly. A 17-year-old involved in the crime was found hiding in an apartment in a housing complex. He surrendered immediately, did not resist. During questioning, he provided a detailed account of the events, naming all those involved, including Gustavo, the second teenager, and Benedito, who he identified as the mastermind behind the plan. The teen explained how the group operated, where they hid, how tasks were divided, who created the plan, and how the crime was executed. With this information, investigators located Gustavo at his grandmother's house. Law enforcement arrested him without incident. Gustavo confirmed the details provided by the first team, did not deny his involvement, and shared that his father had instructed him to gather people, outline the plan, actively involve him in the attack. His statement clarified that Benedito had initiated the entire scheme, that Gustavo participated in hopes of gaining his father's approval. The next arrest was of a 16-year-old who was found hiding in a messy lot in Tropicalville. He admitted to being involved in the crime but shared limited details. However, by the time he was arrested, the investigation already had a clear understanding of the situation. The recovered items matched the locations identified by various suspects, but the most important evidence came from their consistent testimonies. These statements outlined how the crime was planned, who was responsible for each part, their actions at different stages, and the order in which they occurred. Technical evidence had already linked Benedito to the central role in the crime. Now it was reinforced by the direct confessions. Once all the individuals involved in the case were in custody, Benedito was brought in for questioning. Initially, he denied any involvement, claiming he was unaware of the crime, he equally shocked by what had occurred. His statements contradicted the confessions of the others. The investigators decided to set up a confrontation. The first meeting was between Benedito and a 17-year-old. When asked to speak, the teenager did not hesitate. He clearly stated that Benedito had given the instructions, taken them to the house, and left them to execute the plan. He identified Benedito as the mastermind, explained how he received specific directives. In his defense, Benedito labeled the teenager a liar, emotionally unstable. Benedito asserted that he would never allow harm to come to Eloisa and claimed he hardly knew the teenagers his son associated with. Things changed when Gustavo entered the room. He clearly stated that he had followed his father's commands. Investigators observed that this was when Benedito's story started to shift. He became vague, deflected blame, and avoided giving specifics. Later, Benedito provided a different account, saying that Sue Ellen had allegedly informed him that her daughter was exploring non-traditional personal identities and had supposedly asked him to remove any influence. He interpreted this as a prompt to take action. However, there was no evidence to support his claim. Eloisa's close friend told investigators that Eloisa had never shown romantic interest in anyone, shied away from personal topics, and had not pursued any relationships. Her family confirmed that she lived in a private world, showing no interest in intimacy or social connections. Benedito's attempt to blame Sue Ellen was viewed as a clear strategy to evade responsibility. Investigators found no evidence that Sue Ellen had any involvement in planning the crime. Benedito crafted a narrative to present himself as a victim, claiming he had misunderstood someone's words and hadn't given clear instructions. During psychological evaluations, investigators observed manipulative tendencies in his behavior. Benedito consistently influenced others while staying in the background, creating no direct links to his actions and controlling events from afar. Testimony from the teenagers made it clear that he was the key figure behind the actions, carefully avoiding direct involvement. He assigned roles, provided instructions, timed events, and maintained an external alibi. Additionally, it was revealed that in 2020, Benedito's biological brother was convicted of a violent crime against his ex-spouse. This attack occurred in broad daylight and resulted in fatal injuries. At the time, Benedito's brother was already subject to restraining orders but disregarded them. Although this was legally separate from Benedito's case, investigators noted a troubling history of aggressive behavior within the De Santana family. As the investigation progressed, Benedito's true nature came to light, revealing him as a manipulative and calculating individual. He not only got teenagers involved in a serious crime but also exploited his own son, believing Gustavo would stay silent. His behavior was cold and calculated, showing no remorse. Attempts to present an alternative story quickly fell apart. The testimonies of his accomplices, along with solid evidence, painted a clear picture against him. When confronted with undeniable facts during questioning, Benedito began to confess. He told investigators that just before the crime, he saw messages between Sue Ellen and her ex-partner, which he interpreted as a betrayal. He felt used and rejected, leading to a breaking point for him. He admitted that Heloisa annoyed him and recognized that she didn't accept him, always regarding him with suspicion. However, he denied harboring any personal hatred towards her, insisting he only wanted to restore balance in his relationship with her mother. This confession confirmed that the crime was premeditated rather than impulsive. It was not motivated by greed or fear of being caught. Instead, it stemmed from a personal desire for revenge, aiming to emotionally break someone and establish control, all while maintaining the facade of a respectable individual. The interrogation revealed that the physical aggression towards Sue Ellen was also planned, intended to incapacitate her, undermine her will, and create a false narrative of a robbery. Benedito aimed to manipulate Sue Ellen's condition and emotional shock to present himself as a concerned bystander and divert suspicion from himself. After the initial investigation, prosecutors confirmed that the case would be treated as a premeditated crime with aggravating factors. The presence of minors, the use of deceit, pre-planning, a government vehicle, and the false staging of an abduction all bolstered the prosecution's argument. Benedito Anunciaco de Santana was identified as the main suspect. He was arrested, suspended from his public position, and subsequently fired. By the time the investigation began, all suspects were in custody. The teenagers were moved to appropriate facilities, while Gustavo, who had just turned 18, was waiting for legal proceedings to take place in adult criminal court. The public's response was immediate and strong. The crime against the young girl, involving her stepfather, caused widespread outrage. Local media extensively covered the case. Central to the public's concern was the issue of trust. How could someone who seemed decent be capable of planning such a crime against his partner's daughter? Sue Ellen learned about her daughter's death while being treated by medical staff. After the assault, she had been taken to the nearest urgent care facility for help. At first, Sue Ellen thought her daughter had been kidnapped and held on to hope that she would be found alive. However, as the investigation continued and the body was discovered in a well, the police revealed the tragic truth. Sue Ellen reacted with intense grief and despair. Witnesses reported that Sue Ellen went into a state of hysteria, requiring sedation. Hospital staff recalled her screaming that she didn't feel alive, that everything was over, and that she somehow felt responsible. Later, while giving her testimony, Sue Ellen admitted she blamed herself for what happened. She realized she failed to recognize the true character of the man she had welcomed into her life. Benedito had seemed trustworthy, kind, and attentive. Only Eloisa had been wary of him from the start, but Sue Ellen dismissed her concerns as typical teenage defiance. Sue Ellen survived, but she was deeply affected by her experience, resulting in a loss that could never be reversed. The case is being investigated as murder, armed robbery, and child abuse. Heloisa's memory lived on, touching the lives of people beyond just her family. The school she attended released an official statement offering condolences and remembering her aspiration to become a veterinarian. Her relatives urged the public to be more careful about whom they invite into their homes, particularly regarding the safety of their loved ones. Although this family's story ended in tragedy, it served as a strong reminder that danger can often appear in the guise of kindness, and that the justice system's role extends beyond punishment to include prevention. Surveillance technology, law enforcement, and the analysis of digital evidence were essential in solving the case. However, the most crucial factor was our focus on the small details, those initial signs that indicated something was wrong. It was early morning in Chapel Hill when two friends returned to their apartment, assuming Faith Hedgepeth was just sleeping in. Her car was parked outside, and the door was unlocked, making everything seem normal. However, as they entered her room, they were shocked by what they found. A blanket covered something on the floor. There was blood on the walls. The room was eerily quiet, but it was evident that something horrific had occurred. There were no signs of forced entry. Security cameras had not captured anyone coming or going, only a few strange late-night texts and some unusual behavior. It was a crime scene that would be etched in their memories forever. What really happened in that apartment? Why did it take so long to catch her killer? Faith Hedgepeth was born on September 26, 1992, in Warren County, North Carolina. She was a proud member of the Haliwa-Saponi Native American tribe. After her parents divorced when she was an infant, her mother, Connie Hedgepeth, and her older sister, Rolanda, played significant roles in her upbringing. Despite the separation, Faith maintained a strong relationship with her father, Roland, who described her as the light that helped him overcome his struggles with addiction. Her birth gave him renewed purpose. Faith was gifted and ambitious, excelling in her studies. She received the prestigious Gates Millennium Scholarship and enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she initially pursued a degree in biology. Although she faced challenges transitioning to university life, Faith remained determined. She switched her major, worked 2 jobs, and stayed focused on her goal to be the first in her family to graduate from college. She aspired to become either a pediatrician or a teacher, reflecting her compassionate nature. Faith shared an off-campus apartment in Chapel Hill with her friend and former freshman roommate, Karina Rosario. They lived in an apartment at Hawthorne at the View, a complex just minutes from campus. At one point, Karina's boyfriend, Eric Takoi Jones, also stayed with them, but his presence created tension. Their relationship became toxic, characterized by conflict and breakups. Even after Karina changed the locks, Eric tried to break into the apartment twice. With Faith's support, Karina secured a protective order against him. Despite this, Eric moved into another unit in the same complex, remaining disturbingly close. On September 6, 2012, Faith attended her classes and then participated in an event hosted by Alpha Pi Omega, the oldest Native American sorority in the country, which she hoped to join. At 7:15 p.m., she left the event to work on a history paper about her tribe. At 8 p.m., she and Karina went to the campus library. From 8:30 to 9, she exchanged text messages with her father about her hopes of joining a sorority. Faith briefly left and returned at 11:30 p.m. They headed back to their apartment around midnight. Shortly after, they decided to go to the Thrill, a nightclub that allows entry for people under 21. Security footage showed them entering the Thrill at 12:40 a.m. They danced for over an hour before Karina began to feel unwell from drinking. They were recorded leaving at 2:06 a.m., with Faith driving them home. Upon returning to their apartment, Karina reportedly got sick and went to bed. Around 3 a.m., a neighbor heard loud noises from above, which sounded like heavy thuds, similar to furniture being knocked over or a heavy backpack falling. Faith's Facebook account showed activity at around 3:30 a.m. Just 10 minutes later, a text message from Faith's phone was sent to Brandon Edwards, one of Karina's ex-boyfriends. The message said, "Hey B, can you come over here, please? Rosario needs you more. You know, please let her know you care." Brandon replied the next afternoon at 4:16 a.m., asking who had messaged him, but by then, it was too late for a response. No reply ever came. While these messages were sent, Karina's phone also displayed outgoing calls to Brandon. At 3:52 a.m. Karina called Jordan McCrary, a UNC-CH soccer player she knew. At 4:25 a.m., Karina left the apartment and got into McCrary's car. She left the apartment door unlocked because she thought Faith was asleep. The following morning, around 10:30 a.m., Karina tried to contact Faith for a ride back but received no response. So, she reached out to their mutual friend Marisol Rangel, who came to pick her up. They arrived at the apartment just before 11 a.m. and assumed Faith had just slept in. Once inside, they called her name but got no reply. What they discovered in the bedroom was shocking. Faith's body was found partially undressed and covered with a blanket, positioned against the bed. Her shirt had been pulled up over her head, and there were signs of a brutal attack, with blood splattered on the walls, floor, and furniture. A used tampon was also found near her body. There were no signs of forced entry, and unfortunately, no security cameras recorded any activity in or out of the apartment that night. Karina was the one who called 911. When the authorities arrived at the apartment, Faith's death was confirmed at the scene. The crime was extremely brutal. Faith had been violently attacked. In the following days and months after the murder of 19-year-old Faith Hedgepeth, investigators uncovered unsettling details that painted a chilling picture but still raised many questions. One key finding was the presence of semen on Faith's body. DNA testing showed that it matched genetic material found in the bedroom. Although physical evidence suggested a possible abuse assault, the autopsy revealed no significant trauma to the genital area. Nevertheless, the Chapel Hill police leaned toward the belief that Faith had likely been abused, a conclusion supported by her family. An autopsy determined that Hedgepeth died from blunt force trauma to the head, likely caused by being struck by an empty rum bottle in the apartment. The Bacardi rum bottle found at the crime scene became crucial evidence. It contained tissue fragments and DNA, leading investigators to suspect it might have been the murder weapon. Next to Faith's body was a fast food bag from Time Out with a handwritten message, "I'm not stupid," and "jealous." Interestingly, despite the room being covered in blood, the note remained clean. This implies that the killer either wrote it after the attack, taking the time to clean themselves, or placed it there carefully to hide their identity. Handwriting expert Peggy Walla analyzed the note and determined that it was written in a disguised manner, suggesting that the author intentionally altered their handwriting to avoid recognition. Faith's murder deeply affected the Chapel Hill community, where homicides are rare, averaging less than one per year. Police Chief Chris Blue stated that the investigation quickly became one of the largest homicide cases in North Carolina's history. However, updates were scarce for many months, making the search for answers painfully slow for Faith's family. Her mother, Connie, shared that they were not allowed to see Faith's body. Additionally, all information about her death was kept confidential by a court order, which was unusual for the Chapel Hill police. In December 2012, the FBI became involved in the investigation and created a psychological profile of the suspect. They believed that Faith's killer likely knew her and might have lived nearby. It was suspected that the individual took a special interest in the case, possibly discussing it often or showing unusual behavior afterward. By July 2014, after obtaining a court order, the Chapel Hill police released 300 pages of case documents. The autopsy report, which came out in September, confirmed what the family had suspected. Faith died from multiple blows to the head. Her body had numerous cuts and bruises, and blood was found under her fingernails, indicating she had fought for her life. Court documents revealed that during the initial investigation, only 2 apartments were searched, Faith's and one other in the same complex. Some sources claim that the wooded area behind the apartment was never investigated. Additionally, reports suggested that no search dogs were used, and officers did not canvass the neighborhood to question other residents, which was surprising given the high-profile nature of the case. Faith's phone revealed a possible clue in her case. On the night she died, she called her friend, Marisol Rangel, 3 times, with one of the calls resulting in a voicemail that accidentally recorded while the phone was in her pocket. The message is hard to decipher, but those close to Faith believe it captured a moment of tension. Some think they can hear arguing or a struggle, while others perceive it as background noise from a nightclub. Faith's father, Roland, claims he can detect his daughter's distress in the recording. Journalist Tom Gasparoli became very interested in the case, starting a blog and podcast to help uncover the truth. He collaborated with forensic audio expert Arlo West, who analyzed the voicemail thoroughly. West, experienced in audio enhancement and forensic analysis, found that the recording contained 4 voices, 2 male and 2 female, suggested that the conversation was heated. The voicemail was time-stamped at 1:23 a.m., just before Faith was seen leaving the club with her roommate. At 2:07 a.m. on September 7, 2012, surveillance cameras recorded Faith Hedgepeth and her roommate leaving the Thrill nightclub. Everything appeared normal at that time. However, as the events of that night were examined, investigators and independent experts started to doubt the accuracy of the digital evidence. Arlo West raised concerns about the timestamp of a voicemail left from Faith's phone at 1:23 a.m., which seemed inconsistent with the nightclub footage. West noted that both Faith and her friend Marisol Rangel had phones that often had timestamp issues. He also pointed out that the local cell towers were unreliable, suggesting the message might have been recorded at a different time. Although the Chapel Hill police agreed to review the enhanced audio version, they maintained confidence in the original metadata, stating they did not believe the recording captured the moment of the murder. Much of the attention also focused on Karina's ex-boyfriend, Eric, who was known to dislike Faith's influence on Karina and reportedly blamed her for their breakup. Police discovered concerning messages that Eric sent in the hours leading up to the murder. On September 6th, he texted a friend asking for forgiveness for something he was about to do. He also posted a similar message on Twitter. 3 days after Faith was killed, he shared a cryptic post on Facebook, stating, "Dear Lord, forgive me for all my sins and the ones I may commit today. Protect me from the girls who don't deserve me and those who wish me dead today." Investigators seized Eric's vehicle and searched his home, but they found no valuable evidence. His DNA did not match the sample found at the crime scene. Despite his cooperation, the police still considered him a person of interest, suspecting that he might know who was responsible, even if he was not directly involved. In 2015, police in Chapel Hill were hopeful that DNA evidence would eventually lead to an arrest in the case. Although they did not disclose the specific DNA details or its collection location, they maintained a positive outlook. At the same time, Faith's death caused significant fear and sorrow on campus. Memorial vigils were organized, including a traditional Native American ceremony to celebrate her life and spirit. Many students grieved for her, viewing her not just as a friend but as a cultural sister whose joy and compassion had positively impacted many. In 2016, a significant breakthrough renewed interest in the case. A laboratory in Virginia analyzed DNA from the crime scene and created a composite sketch of a potential suspect. This image was developed using forensic phenotyping, which can predict characteristics such as eye color, skin tone, face shape, and likely ancestry. The results suggested that the suspect might be of Native American descent with either European or Latino ancestry. While the sketch was not a definitive identification, it offered investigators and the public a possible face associated with the crime. Several people associated with Faith were investigated in connection with the ongoing case. One of them was a man who left the nightclub with Faith and Karina. He had arrived at the club earlier with 3 companions. All 4 were questioned and provided DNA samples, but none matched the DNA from the crime scene. Faith's father has been very vocal, insisting that Karina knows more than she has shared. Other people have also raised concerns about Karina's actions after Faith's body was found, regarding the 911 call she made. The call lasted over 8 minutes but did not mention Faith by name and omitted the fact that another friend was present in the apartment, giving the impression that Karina was alone. Police have indicated that Karina's account raises several questions, and there are inconsistencies in what she told investigators. One neighbor who saw Karina shortly after the body was discovered remarked that neither girl seemed upset. Complicating matters, Karina had reportedly left the nightclub early because she felt unwell but then left her apartment again just hours later, leaving the front door unlocked. A university soccer player picked her up, and his roommate noticed a small red mark on Karina's clothing that day. Police were alerted and searched for the shirt, but the test results were inconclusive. Authorities could not determine if the stain was blood, nor could they connect Karina directly to the crime. Despite the absence of physical evidence linking her to the murder, Karina has remained a key figure in the investigation. A private investigator, who is closely working with Faith's family, believes that the truth may involve Karina. He speculates that a possible argument between Faith and Karina at the Thrill nightclub, possibly related to a relationship, could have triggered Faith's death. Shortly after the murder, Karina moved out of North Carolina and has not publicly addressed the case. According to Faith's father, Roland, she also stopped returning his calls. Nevertheless, the police state that Karina has always been cooperative when they contacted her. For almost 10 years, the murder of Faith Hedgepeth remained clouded by theories, suspicions, and unanswered questions. Friends, former partners, and acquaintances were all investigated, and despite numerous leads, no arrests were made until 2021. On September 16, 2021, the Chapel Hill Police Department announced they had arrested 28-year-old Miguel Salguero Olivares from Durham, North Carolina. This breakthrough didn't come from tips or interviews, but from DNA collected after Miguel was arrested for a DUI in Wake County the previous month. His DNA profile was entered into the system and matched DNA found at the crime scene nearly 9 years earlier. Additionally, court documents revealed that a palm print found on the suspected murder weapon, a liquor bottle, also matched Miguel, strengthening the case against him. Prior to this discovery, the police had not identified him as a suspect, and his name had not appeared in earlier reports. Police Chief Chris Blue urged the community to be patient, saying, "This story will take time to completely unfold." In November 2024, the case took a significant turn. Prosecutors updated the original charges, adding 3 new ones: first-degree burglary, first-degree abuse, and first-degree abuse offense. These new charges intensified the seriousness of the allegations and clarified what may have happened in Faith's apartment that night. The arrest brought a mix of relief and renewed anguish. After years of uncertainty, a suspect had finally been named, someone now officially accused of causing Faith's death. However, as the legal proceedings began, it started a new phase in the quest for answers. Who was Miguel Salguero Olivares? How did he meet Faith? What exactly occurred in her final moments? For her family, this was a long-awaited step toward justice. Yet, for a community still grieving, it was just the beginning of discovering the complete truth.